Morning, 6:30. Apple. I call this meeting of the Manchester by the Sea Board of Selectmen to order. Jeff,
Yeah,
Kathy.
Yes.
Ann is here, Brian
is here.
and John.
Is here.
John is there. Okay. The first thing on the agenda is public comments on non-agenda items. Is there anyone here for that? Mr. Starkey, would you give us
Yes.
your name and address?
My name is Jim Starkey, 13 Tux Point Road.
Thank you.
Okay, in 2011, after 3 years without a mooring assignment from the waiting list, over 200 people stayed until 11:45 at night at town meeting to pass a harbor bylaw by about a 2-to-1 margin over the unanimous opposition from the Board of Selectmen. The bylaw, among other things, mandated transparency in mooring changes and, after approval by the Attorney General, had the force of law. The bylaw was in full effect when our harbor master was hired. Nevertheless, from his start date to today, the harbor master has refused to comply with the bylaw, specifically to maintain and publish a log of mooring changes. With the provisional mooring program, we now know the market value of a Manchester mooring. Manchester Marine is getting $250 per foot, which is $10,000 for a 40-foot boat per season, while a mooring fee for an ordinary mooring is $15 per foot or $600 for the same 40-foot boat. Applying the $10,000 per mooring over 10 years gives an approximate value of a Manchester mooring at a minimum of $100,000. It also puts the monetary value of the 10 under-the-table moorings that the harbor master gave to Manchester Marine at a cool $1 billion. So why would a harbor master want to keep mooring changes secret? Is there something to hide? Unfortunately, yes, there is a lot to hide. First, there were the 10 moorings.
I just need to interject here for a minute.
Yes.
If we are making accusations about a staff member, that is not an appropriate venue to be doing this.
Excuse me? Excuse me?
You seem to be implying some malfeasance by one of our staff. Am I misunderstanding what
May
you're
I finish
saying?
my statement, sir?
No, but I just wanted to interrupt before you do that, because would not be the appropriate forum to do so.
Okay, Madam Chairman, I object to being stopped, and I'm going to stop my statement right here. I will send it to Debbie, and she can send you. I'm sorry.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the chairman's report. I will have a report. And then go on to action items. Okay, is there anything that we have as an action item that
Not being able to see.
at our February 18th meeting, we took up question of more assignments of the rental moorings for Manchester Marine, but did not come to a conclusion. I suggest that we put that on our next agenda. Anything else?
Where did we leave the situation on the parking? We had talked about implementing, painting the lines, et cetera, because I noticed the cones in front of Seaside One have been removed. So I thought we had some agreement on,
It should be back out. I'll have to see about the plowing and putting them back out.
okay,
I think some may be being moved. Chief actually has his hand up.
okay.
Yes, good evening. I'm working with the DPW that as soon as the weather breaks, they are gonna make a permanent lines will be painted and there'll be a permanent signs put in. We already added one sign on the outbound side next to the street pole on the light pole. But need to do some work on the other side, but it is in process.
So when the weather gets warmer, are we targeting then April maybe?
We're targeting as soon as the DPW will give us the go ahead to do it.
So thank you very much, Chief. So I'm just wondering if we can just put it on our action item list to close it out, you know, in April, make sure things have been implemented according to the decisions that we made, you know, a number of weeks ago, because I certainly don't want to forget. Thank you. That was it.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is a new used car dealer's license. Right, with you?
That's me.
That's you, yeah.
So I'm here to answer any questions. Happy to talk about it, anything you guys want. I've written the cover letter, so
Yeah,
we're a
There's
small collector car company, and this is sort of the next sort of iteration of the business, is to be able to better facilitate the processes and efficiencies through having a car dealer license.
Excuse me, should the gentleman,
I'm sorry,
Oh,
yes.
my name, Silas Neri, 50 Summer Street.
So from a licensing perspective, everything seems to be in order and I don't see big issues. The one question that arises is a zoning question. And I think Paul Orlando was wanting to talk to town council and just do a little more homework based on our bylaws. So our bylaws are silent in terms of the table of uses, but it does talk about car dealership and boat dealerships in the parking section. So there seems to be an omission in the use table.
Would it be that was a dealer years ago, would that be grandfathered in?
Well, but it's been something in between,
Oh, okay.
so it lost that.
Always commercial.
In
in the
potential.
G district, so as far as I could tell, we couldn't do any better than what we have in town, right? So happy to, and I had emailed Mr. Orlando, but I haven't. So,
Yeah, I think he's trying to connect with the council on it.
Gotcha.
So my recommendation is that you can grant approval, but it's contingent on resolving any zoning questions.
Me. Didn't we grant a used car dealership to someone else a couple of years ago?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we do that there.
Yeah.
We do it through every
It's,
year.
yeah, online.
right, yeah.
Okay, well, since John isn't here and doesn't have a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
I move that the select board approve a used car dealer's license for Storm Castle Automotive LLC at 50 Summer Street, contingent on the resolution of any zoning issues.
Second.
Okay. Jeff,
Yes.
Kathy,
yes.
Ann says yes,
Yes.
and John.
Yeah.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Good luck.
You too.
Sell my car.
Okay, the next thing is some organizations that have asked for board representation. Cape Ann Transportation. And Greg has suggested that John would be good for this, but if somebody wants to steal it away from him.
I think the seniors probably have the biggest interest in this initiative, and I interact with them.
Okay.
So I'm okay with this. I guess, Greg, I asked, does this interface, is this like what, monthly meetings and anything else that comes up, or what is it? Or you don't know?
Yeah, at most monthly,
Okay,
maybe more like every 6 weeks or so.
that's doable from my perspective.
Question. On a related topic, since we're looking for a rep for this board, do we still have and we're moving money away from the MBTA, do we still have representation on the MBTA set of committees there somehow? I know at one point we were looking for representation there. I thought, I don't know, Anne, if that was you and whatever happened with that.
I get their emails, I look at them, I put them in a safe place,
And it's in the MBTA advisory board.
yes.
Uh,
And it seemed to me that there were an awful lot of people there who knew an awful lot more about MBTA than. And
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
it's,
Okay.
our engagement with that isn't that critical. There's not so many issues that affect. They're not making very many changes out this way and that sort of
So
thing.
the question is, should they? So I
Right.
guess, I'm totally fine with John being on the CADA board, but if you want any relief on the MBTA, I would
let
be
me,
happy.
let me
to-
find
you think
those
about that, yeah.
saved
Okay.
emails and
Yeah.
send it to you and send something to them saying
Yeah.
that they should talk to you.
Okay, that's great.
And the final one is, the update of the hazard mitigation plan. And, no, the next one is the water meter vendor review. And again, John was on the, there was our representative on the water task force, and if he's willing, I think he should.
I'm willing, and I'm somewhat familiar with two of the bidders who were primary, had primary consideration when we were looking at the modern or the up-to-date water meter concept that was presented to the DPW. I don't know, when was that, eight months ago, or maybe it was a year ago. I can't remember. But yes, this is fine.
And the next is the hazard mitigation plan update. It looks like it may be a bit more lifting, not much, but somewhat more lifting. And I'd kind of like to do that. Fine. Oh, fine. Thanks.
Well, they
Okay.
had 51.
We have now 18 minutes or so. What, can we take up the consent agenda? Are there any items on the consent agenda that we want to pull out?
I guess I had some questions on the naming policy for the fields. There was something different than what we had previously discussed. I was having trouble understanding what was different.
I think. Were there any changes?
So I think their sort of response back to you was that they felt that the concerns or questions that you were raising were best raised sort of on an individual basis, case by case, and didn't need to be in the policy itself. So they recommended staying with the language that they originally proposed. It's your call.
Your concern, one of your concerns, Kathy, was that it might be nice to have some indication in the name where you might find the field.
Yes.
To that point, Sweeney Park, people find it. Okay, Coach Fields Field, they find, Island Field, they find.
No, I know, it was more just around, you gotta be careful when naming after a person. I just wanna make sure, that whatever parks we have, certainly that we have, they are very easy to find on the website or whatever. It's a problem when you're shuffling kids around. And I thought there were some other issues and I just can't.
If the, right,
So it's, the select board is making the ultimate decision, right?
select board is
Okay.
making the ultimate decision and if the interactive mapping that, yeah. That would be a great tool, assuming that they're willing to put in, the name of the field and a pin. And maybe someplace, on the website, saying Parks and Rec somewhere, Tiffany or someone could put a list of the
Right.
playing
Yeah.
fields and how to find them.
Yep.
Can I add that to the, I mean, I think my concern is stuff doesn't get done unless we put it in writing. So is there some way we can just add in here that, once approved or whatever, the, program website will be updated or whatever? I just didn't see that. I mean, I could be missing it. I apologize, but I didn't see that in there. So the website is kind of inconsistently updated. So something like this that people need to find, it needs to be part of the procedure that they get it done.
Um, You want to pull that out with a specific recommendation that they, cause the website to be updated when a new field is added, or the field name is changed?
Within a couple of weeks of the approval, yeah.
Um,
So we have to pull that out
We'll pull that out,
and then vote on
Vote on the
it later.
consent agenda.
we'll vote on the consent agenda and then come back and
Okay.
give some specific language to picture that. Okay, is there a move to accept the consent agenda?
I move the board approve the consent agenda minus the naming policy, which we'll vote on later.
Further discussion? No.
Yes.
Kathy? Anne says yes. John?
Yes,
Brian?
Yes,
Okay. That, language be added to the naming policy, saying the new or renamed fields should be posted on the Parks and Rec section of the town website with directions to the location.
Friendly amendment within 2 weeks after the name is approved. Having 6 months later, that's not very helpful.
Okay.
So moved.
Second. Further discussion? Okay, Brian?
approved.
John?
yes.
Anne says yes. Kathy?
Yes.
And Jeff?
Yes.
Okay. Um, 12 minutes.
Liaison updates.
Liaison updates. John, do you have anything?
No, nothing promptly, except I can see Russia from here. But,
You stay with Sarah Palin.
at least from the top floor of the hotel anyway. No other updates from Alaska or otherwise.
I don't really have anything. I only got to see half of the planning board because I had another engagement this week.
Just on the downtown improvement, we did at our last meeting, and I know it's on the action items. We're gonna have a discussion on the public bathrooms, some decision on that. They're really pulling for that. They also just prioritized, since we couldn't afford the wayfinding signs that were planned, they did send a prioritized list to DPW for the top 3, so at least we could get those done under this year's budget, and the remainder can get done under next year's budget. So I don't know where that stands, but DPW should have had that in their hands at least last week, not the week before. And I missed Spike and Ped because it was a concurrent meeting with the select board 2 weeks ago.
Parks and Rec, winter basketball is finally over as of last night. Summer playground registration has opened as of today. The summer interviews will start next week for staffing program. And beach tags go on sale April 1st. That's all I got. Just mean it's getting warm. I didn't have, and well, and then obviously at some point, pickleball courts will open up,
No.
so we can start that round all over
It's
again.
positives, you know.
I don't want to leave you
Subjects we
high.
don't discuss.
How is the mitigation measures going on that?
I think it's going very well.
Yeah. Are they
That's my
in
knowledge.
place?
No one's complained in the last 2 months.
For the winter.
School committee meets tomorrow. We had an interesting meeting of the non-production group. Got a problem scheduling it again before the 18th because everybody is elsewhere,
Either or, yeah.
hither and yon.
Yeah.
There seem to be somewhat different goals, I thought. Jake Foster, who is on the school committee, finance committee, seems to think that there is a way of putting together a budget that will let us go forward for 3 years. And we've all taken our spreadsheets home and are trying to figure out what that solution is. Don't giggle, Greg. But I am sure we will get together sometime before they make their decision on their budget.
When do they have to have their budget?
Well, they should have it in now,
I know,
but
but deadline,
they have said that they will have it by on the 18th. And that's inconvenient for the finance committee. And the finance committee has agreed to make some changes, to put in some information in their report at kind of the last minute to make that work.
Since the report's due on the 19th.
Plan to be up late on the 18th.
Don't drink heavy on the 17th.
Um. Could we talk a little bit about the warrant articles? Because I don't think we'll get through it, but
That's fine. So as we discussed at your last meeting, there will be 4 to 6 planning board zoning amendments to consider as part of the warrant. Next Monday, a week from tonight, will be an important meeting for them as they work through potential changes. And we'll know more after that meeting, which ones may be advancing and which ones may be back to the drawing board on that. There are 3 petition articles that were received by the deadline, last week's deadline. One is a vote, it'll be a non-binding vote, but it's a vote on the tobacco sale prohibition for anyone born after 2004, I believe. Yeah, 2004. So that was approved by the Board of Health, and the article seeks to ask whether or not people want to would prefer not to see that in place. Ultimately, it is a Board of Health decision, but obviously a vote one way or the other would have influence, we would assume. The second article is for prohibition on certain rodenticides. class of rodenticides that tend to accumulate in other animals if they eat rodents that have ingested the poison. So there's a desire, there's efforts in many communities to remove these from the environment. So this is an article to do so here in town. There's a third.
We have to do it in 2 stages because there is a state law that says that towns can't have more rigorous standards than the state does. And so we're initially voting on an home rule petition to allow us to adopt more stringent standards. And then, assuming that that passes, the actual regulations would be in the fall.
Is there a list somewhere of the chemicals that are involved?
I'll find that, Mass Audubon has it. They've got a lot of information for this. I will get it for you. I'll just distribute it.
Yeah, great. I'd like to see it. Thank you.
The third petition article is a proposal to amend our current heavy construction timeframe and noise bylaw. The proposal seeks to expand the definition of construction and impose much higher fines for violations of the bylaw. So the proposed violations would be $500 for the first offense, $1,000 for a second, $1,500 for a third, onto a fifth, and then after a fifth violation, a cease and desist order would be required if the bylaw would be approved.
This would need a 2/3, right?
I'm sorry?
A 2/3 vote?
No, because it's just a general bylaw. So it would be just a majority vote.
Can there be waivers to that? Can someone apply for a waiver?
Their bylaw allows for exceptions for emergency projects.
Safety.
So it changes the exceptions. And the exceptions are limited to emergency vehicles and emergency repairs to utilities.
I had a question on whether the intent, is there an intent to, for this to apply to, leaf blowers and stuff? Or is it, anything loud, or is it just construction?
No, because it applies to anything that requires a building permit. So it would not apply to homeowners and their leaf blowers.
That's next.
That's interesting because you don't need a building permit to excavate. Or whole ram.
So it did, right, it did include site work and excavation in the definition of construction.
Well, Greg, will the article also include what the current bylaw, how the current bylaw reads?
Yeah, I think what we'll do is put the whole bylaw in and show strike throughs and bold, strike throughs for what's being deleted and bold for what would be new.
Okay.
Because I think you're right, John. I think people need to see.
Yeah, I don't have perspective.
Yeah, people want to see the whole context and what the current language is.
I actually have a question on the first one, the tobacco sale prohibition removal. So even though that's non-binding, should it be approved at town meeting, but the Board of Health takes no action? Is there a way for us to put it on the ballot and have it be a binding vote at an election of some sort?
No, there really isn't. State law gives boards of health the authority to adopt various types of regulations. This is one of them. So they do have that authority. So there's no real opportunity to override that authority.
moved by a whole new petition, but. No,
Okay. Well, I think that anything, it's, Kathy, you were on that hearing, right? There wasn't a lot of public input.
Right, I just, I was disappointed to find out it was completely non-binding.
It wasn't that
So-
design.
So I'm curious as to what the recourse, I hope that, you know, if, I mean, the residents may want to leave it in place, and if so,
That's their choice.
that's their choice. But if the residents' voice tells us that they want something different, I would hope the Board of Health would take that into consideration, and if not, then we've got to have a discussion on that.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So we can clarify.
I think it's 7 o'clock. I think we have handled much of the business in front of us. I don't think ask for the finance committee. They'd like to join us.
At 7 o'clock on Monday, March 3rd. Finance committee meeting to order. I have with me in both Tom Gardens. And Peter Twining, Dean Hines, and Lloyd Creighton is upset.
Okay, the first item that we were going to talk about is a presentation of the operational audit. And Mr. Keegan is here.
So, yeah, Bill Keegan is here from Capital Strategic Solutions, a consulting firm. We put together an operational audit. And many of you have met with Bill and were able to give some good input. And so he's here this evening to give us an overview of that report and to engage in a discussion with both you and the finance committee. Let me get my screen shared here.
All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me back to Manchester. I prefer to come in the summertime as opposed to the winter time, but quite honestly, it's just a beautiful place as it is, and we have a beautiful community. I'm getting a little bit, I was having tremors before the meeting started because I haven't been in front of a selectman and a finance committee in 2 years. And when I retired as town manager back in Foxborough a couple of years ago, but so those of you who don't know me, my name is Bill Keegan. I'm actually a senior project manager for Capital Strategic Solutions. I've been in public service for 42 years. I've been doing these types of studies literally all over the country. And I appreciate the opportunity to work back in my home area of Massachusetts. I still live in Seacock, Mass, and I've been here the past 26 years. So love to get up in the North Shore whenever I can because it's just a beautiful place. So thank you for having me back. So we have concluded our results, the results of our findings. I thought I would spend a few minutes with you just going through some of those findings tonight. What I'm going to give you is a snapshot of our findings, not all of them. The details are actually included in the report, which we were able to provide for you this evening, a binded copy of the report. And also we'll put this up on the website for you as soon as we do it. We saw a couple minor fixes that we have to do. We probably had 6 people read this report, and of course somebody always finds something at the very end. So that's how that typically works. So we're going to fix that and we can get it over to you. But we're very, it was interesting. It was an interesting report, an interesting study and analysis that we came across. We're going to cover a number of different areas, and maybe we can go to the next slide for it. So tonight's report will cover a number of different things: the purpose of the audit, the scope and methodology, community overview, existing conditions, department reviews, key department findings, structural insights, existing organizational design, improved organizational structure, communication and strategy, strategic planning, operational uses of technology, key challenges and capital needs, and recommendations and action steps. I want to tell you that that you have a terrific number of staff members that work for this town. They're very dedicated. I find that their work, interest, and ethic is all about this community, which is really something that you should all be proud of, because you selected these people and you should be proud of what they do. And first I want to say before I start is that I appreciate all the work that you all do, because this community wouldn't function without the volunteerism, the efforts, the time that you all place in doing this work. So I appreciate that. So thank you. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the audit was to assess operational efficiencies and effectiveness, evaluate staffing levels and succession planning, review technology utilization, and recommend enhancements, provide strategic guidance for the future governance. We embarked upon this study for a couple of reasons. One is the fact that it's been a while since the community has actually looked at this type of thing, if ever, for that matter. Because the organization has been structured in such a way that it's been functioning like that for many years. The Board of Selectmen and the town administrator felt this would be an opportune time to do this, because you're looking at a change in the administration. This provides the new person, whoever that might be, with a new roadmap of how the organization might function into the future. One of the things that we'll see is that the organization is relatively flat. Which means that there's a lot of people reporting to one person, namely the town administrator, which makes that job much more difficult and sort of limits the ability to do strategic planning and having strategic discussions, because all the time is being spent dealing with the day-to-day issues and challenges that come across any community in Massachusetts or any community across the country. Next slide, please. So the scope of methodology was conducted by interviewing key stakeholders, department heads, board members. We reviewed the existing documents of studies that were done. Analysis, we now have analysis of organizational structure and communication flows to see how the organization communicates with itself, and how you communicate outside the organization as well. And then recommendations were based on the best practices in local government today. We found that organizations that are structured similarly to what you are structured right now is very common. It's actually more common than you think. Unfortunately, organizations today, everybody wants information within a minute, so it's and built upon the current structure of government in general, it's very difficult to generate that kind of response time, given the number of people that they're reporting to one individual. Next slide, please. So just a brief overview of the community. Manchester by the Sea is a coastal community with a population of about 5,500 people, known for its scenic beaches and vibrant harbor. It was a transitional community from the fishing industry to furniture making, and then on to a residential and more of a tourism community as it is right now. You face infrastructure and environmental challenges due to your coastal location. I wasn't here more than 10 minutes and I could see that there were challenges as soon as I pulled into the parking lot, because the tide was actually almost even with the parking lot the first time I came here, and I said, well, that's going to be a problem. And it wasn't a storm going on either. It was quite interesting to see that. So yeah, that's something we're going to have to talk about a little bit as we get through this study today. The next slide, please. So the department interviews, we met with all the major operating departments in the town, and we identified many of the operational strengths and weaknesses. What we found is that generally speaking, everybody focuses on their work individually as opposed to collaboratively. And I think that in of itself is a challenge, because the best decisions come out of collaboration. They don't come from individual siloed approaches which is typically what happens in many communities. We found that through our studies and through our actions, that the ones that have reduced the number of direct reports and have further division reporting through one department, that you have a much better collaboration for results, and find that the strategic discussions become much more intense and much more solution oriented. We've identified, we gathered the insights of the staffing. We looked at the technology and communication. My colleague Mike Gallagher, who's actually away, but just returned literally this morning, did a lot of the technology evaluation for us. Mike was also a town administrator himself, but also came from the private sector and worked in technology for I think 30 years before he actually transitioned into the public sector. So he has both the public sector and private sector experience, which I think was an action which a preference that the board had wanted when they started. There are heightened needs for improved collaboration and resource sharing, which is something I just touched upon. We want to make sure that everybody is talking with each other internally as well as externally, and we'll talk about the external mechanisms as we get to that later on. Next slide, please. Some of the findings that we determined were that there are staffing shortages which impact service delivery. What we have found, strangely enough, and sometimes when we do these studies, we say, yeah, we can actually move this position around to do this function, and we might be able to share a function across the hall from someone else, so that we actually can achieve some efficiencies in that respect. What we found here, though, is that we actually have shortages of staff, and to the point where, and I use this term a lot, we're efficient to the point of inefficiency. And I worry about that because you have some exposures here, where if certain individuals become sick or are out indefinitely for whatever reason, your certain functions in your town will not function very well at all. There's no backup for those situations at all. So I think that's an exposure which I think you have to address. And I put that in the report in a way which hopefully I can be addressed in the short term as well as in the long term. I recognize that adding staff is always a challenge in every single community across the country. So I recognize that. And I've never been known to be an empire builder in any organization I've ever worked in. But there are actually key positions that need to be backed up in order to properly support the work that you actually do. There's an inconsistent use of technology for efficiency purposes. In other words, you have a lot of technology that's really that's good technology. In fact, the findings that we had is that you're using the right equipment, you're using the right software, but there is enough training involved, or there is enough support involved in the organization to help get the best use out of that technology. So we think that with more better support and better understanding of what those systems can do for you, we think you can have a much better result from the workforce. But we are pleased to find that a lot of the things that you've chosen is actually very good use, and it's actually industry standard in many cases. So we're pleased to see that those don't require significant changes, but we need to do a better job of how we utilize them. There's a better need for staff and succession planning. There needs to be a strategic staff plan in the organization, which doesn't exist now. I think positions get filled when people leave, but is there a conversation that occurs about what's the best thing we can do with that position before we refill it? Let's have the conversation about is there a better equipped job description, a better use of that position before it gets filled, and beyond that, is there a succession plan? So in the event that someone does leave the organization, is there somebody to back that person up and back up that function when it happens? That's strategic staffing coordination, which has to happen in any organization to be successful. One of the things that I really noticed about Manchester is that everybody wants to do the right thing, but there just isn't enough support to do it. The communication challenges within in between the departments, that occurs primarily because of the way the organization is structured. It's a flat organization. Everybody's channeling back through the central position, which is the town administrator, which makes it difficult for the town administrator to do the job, as well as for everybody to get the answers that they want for their questions to be answered and to coordinate efforts throughout the day. So that's something we'll try to address as part of this topic. So we did interview the board members, and there were a number of areas where there was agreement, and the report actually highlights that. but we picked out a couple of these, the key points. There was support universally for reorganization and more efficiency. There were concerns about capital needs and funding challenges. No question, that's one of the biggest ticket items that you have to deal with. There's a desire for improved communication and transparency, making sure that we're getting that the communication internally is resulting in a good dialogue to develop a more strategic solution for our things that we do. That leads, internal communication leads to good external communication, if you will. Which, by the way, you did something which I haven't seen in too many communities, but it's something which I'm really glad you did, is that you hired a communications director, which is something that is really the way we're instructing communities to do going forward, because there's no more local newspapers. There's no more local dialogue about how, other than social media, and quite honestly, social media is very limiting because it's not always truthful, and it's not always best way to get information out. We prefer to see that information coming from a central source from the town, so we can actually correct information when it gets out there incorrectly. There has to be an emphasis on sustainability and environmental resilience. That speaks to the issue of where you're located. You're a coastal community. The significance of being a coastal community, particularly in this particular town, is that you have a lot of high-end, expensive properties located right near the ocean, which, by the way, will in fact impact your tax base in case anything significant happens. Moreover, your public facilities are located near the water, and if any major storm event occurs, you could be left without major services and to be offered to the community. So that in of itself is a major concern that we would like to see you address. We can't force you to do anything, but we certainly recommend that you address that. Next slide, please. So this is the existing organization. This is sort of highlights. Yes.
Would you prefer to get questions at the end of the talk, or the end? This seemed like it's sort of a natural break.
Yeah.
Which is why I've interrupted you.
Sure. If you, I mean, I like to wait to the end only because I can get all the words in, and then I'm happy to answer any question you want. So, because I don't think there's only a few more slides anyways. I've got about 16, 17 slides total. So.
Super. I'm sorry.
No, it's quite all right. It's a fair question. Thank you. This is the existing organizational design. You can see, interesting enough, this was actually taken from one of one of the previous town budgets. I think it was the 24 budget, if I'm not mistaken. Where it shows the organization, and quite honestly, you have the key organizational departments listed across in the green, across the middle part of the organization, but they don't really function like that. I mean, they function, though all those different positions, the blue positions, I believe it is, are all ones that are ones that report effectively through the town administrator, and some of the clear ones as well. So that makes it difficult for that work to be done in a coordinated way. There's not that many elected boards, which is interesting to me, because in some of these other communities that I've worked in, there are a lot more elected boards, which actually makes it even more challenging, because then they have separate charters and responsibilities that they fulfill. It makes not always, then coordination is even more challenging when that happens. So it's a flat organization, 18 direct reports to the town administrator. There's a lack of department integration and strategic communication and plan execution that occurs because of that. It causes that level of challenge. The limited cross-functional collaboration and team dynamics is one which actually is difficult for the employees themselves. One of the things that I learned from meeting with the different department heads is that they would love to have more collaboration and cross discussions on major issues, so that they can actually help participate in the solution process. Again, that's not a slight on Greg, because I have a lot of respect for Greg's work, but the challenge is that it's difficult for him to provide that level of support when he's dealing with an organization structure like this. Next slide, please.
That's what happens when you piss them off.
We may have a break just to say. Not working?
Why did it freeze on me?
Beautiful.
Too bad we didn't have any cross training.
I know. Maybe Wise, do it. You want to take a couple questions if you'd like to do that, so we can, answer?
Yeah.
I'm happy to have everybody look at Greg and make him nervous.
You only get a few more months to do that, by the way, so you might as well take advantage of the opportunity, right?
Does anyone have questions?
I have just one question. The towns that you look at and the things you're seeing, are we sort of fitting into that model of size and complexity? Or are you typically looking at towns with, say, 2 or 3 times our population with these same issues? I'm just sort of, like, from a peer group point of view, how do we line up on that?
From this size community, your organization is very similar in many ways. There's a lot of communities that are structured like this, and especially Massachusetts. I'm just most recently did a study up in New Hampshire, which was a community that was probably 3 times the size of Manchester, but I will say that they had the same kind of issues. And it's interesting to note that I did that study a year ago. Because these 2 communities were so close in terms of your issues that I want to use that as a good comparison. I did that study a year ago, and they were thrilled with the result that came out of it. They actually called me back, and they're actually going to phase 2 now, because they said that the new structure works so well that it actually improved the capital improvement process. It actually improved the decision-making process. And department heads didn't feel like they were on an island anymore. They felt like they were part of a team. And so now they're functioning more like a team as opposed to individuals. And they're getting much better responses. The selectmen are very, very happy with the result of that. And the finance committee couldn't have been happier either, which is, from your perspective, because now they're all understanding the significance of making decisions collectively and supporting each other in that process. Because before, it was more individual oriented and made it difficult for you to make decisions amongst them. Now they're making decisions effectively, collectively together, and then bringing it to you and say, this is what we've agreed on. What do you think? And then try and make that happen. So I think that's a much better process. It's worked out really well.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you mentioned, in your strategic areas, technology, and that's my background, so a special area of interest.
Yep.
How would you assess our use of technology specifically in the area of our financial areas and our areas of compliance, finance, town clerk? How does that compare with other towns in Massachusetts or outside of Massachusetts that you're aware of?
So one of the good news is that you're using ClearGov, right, as a technology. ClearGov is actually the industry standard in many ways in terms of how you build budgets and how you communicate that information to the public.
Mhm.
One of the things that we observed, though, was that it's not being utilized to its fullest extent.
Does it have stuff like, does it have capabilities that if we had the right expertise to help coach the team, they could do like robotics and that kind of stuff?
But it has algorithms in it that actually can measure you against other communities and how you do things.
I'm making note of, because of the data entry, like the additional staff that might be required for data entry, that always gets my
Yeah.
attention up, because that seems counterintuitive to where we're gonna be going. So I'm just wondering, when you say we're using the right tools, if they don't have the right capabilities and we're just at the same level of mediocrity as everybody else, that's not necessarily where we want to be. So what I'm trying to understand is, do you know of anybody that's really, any town or city that's really,
I do.
that we could use as a benchmark?
There are other communities that use this information really, really well. I mean, I can tell you from where I just came from, Foxborough uses that system really, really well.
Mhm.
It's ClearGov. From the very beginning, and we use it as a tool to actually educate the public on it,
Mhm.
which is really what it's intended to be. We hear so often that, the budgets are being built behind closed doors. Well, that's not the case with ClearGov. You get to see it from the beginning to the end as to how it's being done. So I think the more we can do that, the more we can actually provide confidence as you as a town
Mhm.
as to how you're making those decisions. And so when you say that, but there has to be people that can enter that information into the system. That's the other side of
Not
it.
necessarily.
That's the challenge.
Necessarily, that's my point. So I get, and I think what I'm getting at is, as we look to enhance, some of the recommendations here are focused on potential structural changes we could make in the finance areas. In any organization, that should be the most highly automated area. And that includes data entry and stuff like that. So what I was trying to do is just kind of I know in the private sector what's done. I'm trying to understand if there's a benchmark in the public domain that we could leverage. If not, we'll have to take some other tact, but it should be the most highly automated area in the organization.
Well, I can only tell you that there are a number of communities that actually, I believe, have really high standards when it comes to doing the budgeting process.
So that's budgeting, but there's a whole other area.
Well,
of
there's also
compliance.
the finance piece of it as
Yeah,
well.
okay.
So I think that all ties into that.
Mhm.
I mean, the town of Needham comes to mind.
Well, even town clerk, or deeds, things like that. You have places in the Midwest that are doing all sorts of really cool stuff, and I'm curious as to if anybody locally is doing that.
I've not seen a lot in Massachusetts do. I think
Okay.
they do that. And I will tell you what is such a significant difference in Massachusetts is because Massachusetts tends to be very parochial. I mean, we tend to do things, we all want to do
Understood,
things
yeah.
on our own, right? And also that in the Midwest and places in the South particularly,
Yeah.
centralized government is a much bigger, a much more common thing.
Yeah.
Where this, the organization is structured in such a way, it's structured more like a business.
Right.
As opposed to the way it is right now in many communities, because it's been structured that way historically for years that, I'm just beginning my quest to try and fix that, if you will. I mean, because that's why I'm doing these studies, the cities and towns across the country, is to fix this kind of structure because it really is something that's needed so bad.
So, there is a lot of redundancy in all these towns doing their own thing. And I was wondering if you are like looking to transition things more to county government type things. Is that like one of the big?
It's interesting you say that because Massachusetts has been getting away from county government. But yet if you go to Florida, it's all about county. Right, and if you go to California, it's about county, right? So, I actually think that we missed the boat with counties here in Massachusetts. We've gotten away from it to the point now it'd be difficult to get it back. However, regionalization is a different story, all right? Regionalizing functions where cities and towns working together on different functions. And one of the things I've been working on recently is the regionalization of dispatch. And I'm actually running a regional center right now in my part-time. I'm supposed to be retired, by the way, but I'm not really, I'm retired-ish, if you will, but I'm not really doing a very good job of that. But I love doing the regional stuff because I think we can't continue on as cities and towns thinking we can do it on our own. It's just too expensive. It doesn't make sense. It's not a good use of resources. It's not a good reuse. And by the way, you can't get the people to do the work. That's the other challenge. So I think regionalization, it may not be countywide, but regionalization is becoming much more an accepted practice nowadays than it has been in the past.
So might that be something we pursue though through the relationships we already have, for example, like that IT collaborative? Because a lot of what,
Good.
Service regionalization or shared services, some you have to do physically, others can be done through technology and those types of partnerships. So you can eliminate a lot of the individual, manual work by collaborating on technology that might be too expensive for one little town to afford, but you have 8 cities or towns working together, it becomes much more affordable and doable.
Well, you have that model in place now.
Well, right, it seems very basic.
But it is basic. It's not one which should be done. It seems like it should be done on a much higher level.
Exactly,
And-
okay,
And I agree with that.
okay.
I think that one of the biggest outcomes of the discussion was that we found that there just isn't enough support for teaching people how to use these systems. And if we had that, it would help take care of itself. I mean, it really would. So it's no question, it's something that should be expanded.
The example I'll use is payroll. When I started my career, I worked for a company that had, a dozen different locations and they all had their own payroll office.
Right.
Okay, over time, you know.
One,
No,
one.
now they outsource it to ADP, but.
Yeah.
You know, you do just through technology, you didn't have to consolidate the people in one location, use technology to perform the function for everybody.
Right.
And everybody has a town clerk that does the same stuff, you know, and finance is basically the same, you know, there's a lot of commonality.
There's a
that-
lot of common areas. I
A
mean,
lot of common
you
areas.
could say that about public health, you could say that about.
So that's what
assessing.
I'm asking,
You
you
can
know,
say
is-
that about different functions and tools that already exist in cities and towns. But what we're finding is that there's been more of an open discussion these days with cities and towns that are connected to each other to perform certain functions because they can't find the people, number one.
Right.
It's more out of lack of resources
Right.
as opposed to the actual technology itself that's forcing it. So what's driving that is the people right now, more than anything. All right,
I'm gonna let you go back to.
thank you, but it was a good little intersection, so. So this is the improved organizational structure, and you can see that I actually didn't change the main players, but what I did was actually structured those divisions underneath those departments. So now you have effectively 8 operating departments instead of 18. You have the town, all now reporting to the town administrator, but we took some of the functions, even in the town administrator's office, and rewrote the work, and recommended the rewriting of the work of the 2 assistants that are in the office, so that they actually have oversight of certain functions as well. The reason we did that was because those functions need to be connected to the town administrator because they're critical issues. Right, but so they need to be close to the town administrator. But the departments, you'll see that having those departments all together is a huge collaboration opportunity. Huge collaboration. Every one of those functions are all connected to each other in some way, shape, or form. Whereas, you know, for instance, when we looked at assessors, for instance, assessors had building department, GIS, and I think it was all 3, right? Assessors, building, and assessing. And those 3 things, those 3 aren't really connected. They're 3 different functions. So assessing should be with finance, because that's a financial consideration. GIS should be either with planning or DPW. I recommended to go to planning because it's you know, it could be here, and then it could be used in the town hall. The other thing is that is with the building department, that should be with planning and land use. So they're all connected so one land use department could actually handle conservation, building inspection, and planning all in economic development for that matter under the same roof. So I think those are all families. You basically built a family of operations, which is now limited to 8 people, 8 operations instead of 18. Now, if you take this organization and you put those folks around this table, and you have a town administrator, and you have an operations team meeting, guess what happens? It turns into a strategic discussion, because we're not just talking about what we're doing individually now, we're talking about what's good for the town. And that's why I recommended, and it's later listed in the report, that we do operational team meetings once a week. And the reason I say that is because it's an hour-long meeting. It could last, and it could be done virtually. It could be done, or it could be done here. I recommend that you initially do it in person so that everybody develops a relationship with each other. And the funny thing about that, when you put those people in the room together, initially, I mean, I'm just seeing this, it's an interesting human dynamic. I've actually seen this happen, where I walked into a meeting the first time I created a similar type of structure. And everybody was sort of looking at each other and said, okay, what do we do now, right? And 3 meetings later, I had to actually stop them from talking because because we got to get the work. But they already developed those working relationships almost right out of the gate. And I think that's critically important for us to develop that relationship so we can get work done more in the police way. Next slide, please. That's not
Stop this 20 minutes.
Working.
Thank you very much for coming.
It's been a pleasure.
John is general health.
Ollie's bringing that up. One more question on land use.
Sure.
Did you notice any things that we do either better or not as well as other towns in terms of compliance? You know, we do get some complaints from residents around so-and-so wasn't supposed to be doing that. That wasn't in their, you know, special permit or, you know, you know, right now we seem to rely on what I call the tattling
Yeah.
approach for, you know, keeping people in compliance. And I was wondering if other
Yeah,
towns
to be
do
honest, we
better.
didn't do that level of audit, and we did more of a structural audit of the organization as opposed to the individual tasks, if you will, of what they do. Now, I will say that I want to just compliment the land use department that currently exists, the planning department, and also the town for getting the 3A legislation passed the way you did. Because that's a classic example of how you collaborated with the public on that and you made it happen. And so there's collaboration that occurs on many levels when we develop a new structure like this. What happens is that you develop it internally and then you bring it out externally. And by having that you use that same dynamic to invite the public into the discussion. And I strongly recommend when we have these kind of forums of public discussions, is that you don't go to the meeting with an answer. You go to the meeting with an issue. Say, look, this is the challenge we're faced with. How do you suggest that we fix it? And we've got some suggestions here, but we don't have the answers. We need the answers to help. You need to help us get the answers. Thank you, Greg. We'll get through this, I promise. Communication and strategic planning, establish a communication framework for consistency. That's by having the weekly operations team meetings. We want to foster the internal and external communication alignment. So when we have good internal communication, we then take that information and channel it through the communications director, who then provides information to the public as to what we're doing internally and also to all of you at the same time. So if everybody stays informed and better informed about how we handle things. Implement strategic planning with long-term goals. This is, you know, clearly an issue where there hasn't been a lot of time to focus on long-term goals. It's been, yeah, we have them, we know we'd have to deal with them, but how much time have we been able to really spend on them, focus on them? Because the organization wasn't really built that way to do that. And then monitor and adjust strategies for dynamic community or community needs. The systems, everything we do has to be dynamic in how we operate, because things can change overnight, as we've seen. We see all the time, actually. There's so many different factors that come into local government, so many different decision points that have to be considered. But I think if you're in a position where the organization is better suited, is better armed with information it needs to get things done, you'll actually be in a better position to respond to the public as things come along and get asked on a regular basis. So the internal communication will be implement weekly operations meetings, will foster a team dynamic and cross collaboration, improve strategic communication and decision making, because that's really a fallout of that process. And it supports a more collegial work environment. So you want everybody who's a department head to be not only working with people on a regular basis, working with their colleagues around the table, but then you also take that same dynamic and bring it back into their individual divisions or operating departments. So then they become more collegial at that level as well. But you start that discussion internally, and then the department heads come back armed with the information that they need to be very influential, if you will, during the conversations to solve problems that the department head. And the external communications, again, I want to compliment you on developing the director of communications. That's a critical position in today's environment. You want to enhance community engagement and transparency, like you've already done with the 3A. The 3A process is something you need to document and actually continue to duplicate in dealing with difficult challenges along the way. I would recommend you use that same approach in dealing with your capital planning process. Use that same approach. Utilize consistent messaging across platforms so that everybody knows that it's coming from the town. and everybody knows when to expect that information and when it will be coming, so, and people can rely on it, just like they do with newspapers. So that information is coming to them on a regular basis, so they see it. And then you can address concerns with the public proactively. We always want to be able to do that. You don't just be reactive all the time. You want to be able to say, these are the things that we're dealing right now with these are challenges we're faced with. This is how we're dealing with them right now organizationally. If you have concerns, let us know. We'll respond to that. But I think by providing them information that you've come with a way of addressing those concerns proactively, you'll be in a much better position to deal with those concerns. Right, next. So here's the technology piece. So we recognize that, first of all, as I said before, you're actually using the right industry standards, but you want to leverage cloud-based solutions for operational efficiency more effectively and more aggressively. So I think we have the tools, but we're not utilizing them the way we should be using them in some instances. We want to enhance IT support for daily operations, strategic growth, and not having a person who can be here to fix a computer or to do training on a regular basis, I think is a challenge for the staff. I think the staff are eager to learn. I think the staff wants to do more, but they can't because there just isn't a resource that's available on a regular basis. You want to maximize the use of existing software tools for improved productivity. For instance, the classic example given to me was ClearGov, in which it can be used more proactively than it currently is right now. And of course, cybersecurity is a mainstay of every organization right now, and it's actually one which we have to pay close attention to, particularly in areas of water and sewer, because there is cyber concerns about how that's impacting cities and towns across the country, either from some of the players across the pond, or actually from across the world, looking to find ways to impact us locally. So I think we have to be placing very, very close attention to that. Something that has to be paid attention to from Danvers' perspective, is they look at all, they oversee many of our major systems. Some of the key challenges and capital needs. We want to address the environmental impacts of coastal plain. I'm pleased to see you've done some really good studies with that, by the way. The Fuss and O'Neill report and the Tetra Tech report were all critical studies, which I think contain very good information about where you're at currently, looking at the tidal surge issue and looking at ways in which that has to be designed to impact you. And based upon what I read in those studies, you probably got about a 25-year window to address many of the significant structural issues that you have locally. You want to balance the short and long-term capital investment needs. You need to continue to fund ways to just maintain your roads and maintain your infrastructure, capital infrastructure, but also balance that against the needs of infrastructure needs as well. And I think you've done a good job of identifying all your needs, but now you have to prioritize. You have to be able to say, and you have to have the conversation with any kind of school project that's in the discussion as well. It has to be done collectively. It can't be done on separate levels. It should be done as one collective group. Staffing shortage and succession planning is a key area that I mentioned earlier that has to be addressed in a way that makes the most sense to you financially as well as organizationally. I think the reason for succession planning is so important nowadays is because you can't find those people once those people leave. Like, for instance, if an assessor leaves or a finance director leaves or even a town administrator, it's not easy to find people to fill those roles when they do leave. Budget constraints and prioritizing capital projects is something I just mentioned. You've got to, you know what your needs are. You have to prioritize, and you have to come up with a financial plan to make it work. And what you can do is you can time that with some of the things that may be rolling off. For instance, Greg and I talked about, for instance, that you've got your pension system roll off and your OPEB roll off coming within the next 10 years or so, or maybe 5 years, right? In some ways, 5 or 6 years. If that holds firm, that gives you an opportunity to use existing dollars within the budget, which will be less impactful to the taxpayers. So Next slide, please. So what I do recommend is, in some of the action steps that we recommend, is that we initiate organizational restructuring for efficiency and implement weekly operations meetings as soon as possible. Now, not all those organizational changes will be able to be done right away, because some of them are practical and some are not as practical, because you may have to wait for the person to leave before some of those departments can be restructured. Expanding HR support and improve succession planning. And right now, there's very little HR support in the organization, and I will tell you that I'm a former HR director, and as well as being a town manager, so but HR, I was actually asked to become an interim HR director recently for a city in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And it was difficult at best, because there's so many changes that occurred since the last time I was an HR director in probably one of the largest cities in Florida. So it's become a very, very challenging world, and it's even challenging at this level. So I recommend that you do a better job of supporting that if you can financially, because it's really an important aspect of how we operate today. I would prioritize the capital needs, as I mentioned earlier, and enhance communication and technology integration, utilizing your existing technology, and then also in building upon the built-in communication director that you already have, utilizing those tools that you already have. You can use the website, which has been updated recently, fairly recently, so it's actually a good tool right now. You want your communications director to be using that on a regular basis to communicate with putting information out to the public, and find ways to connect the public to you through that system. Utilizing that have people subscribe to it so that they can actually get updated information on a regular basis whenever it's available. Again?
I think it was
Too bad we didn't have an
I think it was
IT
your thank you
department.
slide.
I think we need an IT fix here, right?
Kathy.
Why does it freeze? There it goes.
That was it. So
Thank you.
so thank you. After all that, so thank you. So I'm happy to take any questions, Madam Chair, if you, on how you want to proceed, up to you.
Throw the floor open.
As we look to replace the town administrator, what's your thought on that being a town manager?
So thank you for bringing that, because I do recommend that in the report. That I do think that that the time has come for the town to actually do a charter study, if you will, or an evaluation of your bylaws and create a charter, if you will, that supports the function of the town manager as opposed to a town administrator.
Okay, would you please clarify for me
Sure.
the difference between those
Yeah.
two?
So a charter is sort of
I
like
know what
the,
the charter is.
Okay.
What's the difference between an administrator and a town manager?
okay, so the town manager has more authority to appoint and also has more authority over the budget process.
For example, in our town.
Yeah.
The town administrator does the hiring, the firing, negotiates contracts, directs the development of the budget. What are we missing?
Well, actually, if you read the bylaw, it's the act, the special act, the special act that was, it only really speaks to the hiring, firing piece. It doesn't really speak to the budget piece.
Okay,
Okay, and it doesn't speak to any other aspect of if you look at a typical charter, it will list out all the functions. It'll say, we'll have the final say on dealing with HR issues. There'll be no.
HR is all,
It's all included now, but it's not structured, you know, it's not, there's nothing to fall back on in the event if there is a question about the authority of the town manager. It's not listed anywhere other than to say he has the ability to hire and fire. That's it. That's the only thing that's listed in that language.
There's an easy question, isn't it?
So I'll give it, probably better if I answer through an example, right?
Please.
I'm used to working in 2 or 3 communities where they've had charters. And the charter actually is very specific. It lists out responsibilities not only of the town manager, but also lists the responsibilities of various town boards and committees. It's like Constitution, thank you very much. It's like your constitution for the town, right? And what I found is that town managers nowadays is the preferred title of many administrators. They prefer to be the town manager as opposed to a town administrator by virtue of the title and the responsibility that goes with
I
it.
got the title part, I don't get the responsibility
Okay.
part.
Maybe define the incremental additional responsibility that the manager has.
So for instance, when I was the town manager in Foxborough, for instance, I was not only the appointing authority, but I submitted the budget. I also provided the budget I provided to the selectmen, I also provided to the finance committee. But I also had responsibility for purchasing. I also had responsibility for obviously hiring and firing all the department heads that worked for me. And also dealing with any of the personnel issues, any personnel issue came through me. All right, so it was, if I don't have a list in front of me, but I will tell you, I was probably with 13 or 14 different functions that if you looked
So I
at it, it would
think,
be
I think
clear.
what's happening here is we have done that without the explicit
Authority.
spelling it out and.
Okay.
and-
So you may have already, so you may be doing it,
Yeah.
but you haven't written it anywhere.
Right.
So it's potato is what it amounts to, is because
Yeah.
you can call it anything you want, but you're providing that role as what would be a.
Well, let me ask the question this way. So for example, hiring and firing of direct reports.
Mhm.
You know, if Greg came to us with an issue, you know, we still have the final say,
Mhm.
okay,
the
but
Department heads.
on the department heads. Is that true for a town manager?
Not necessarily.
Okay, that's what I think that's what he's getting at. Some, in
Necessarily.
some towns, the town manager is the final.
Is the final authority.
Period.
In my experience, it really changes the board of selectmen primarily. I mean, that's what your implication is.
I'm sorry, say that again, Pete?
So
What should change is your role.
Yeah, it reduces
Doing of the
the,
hiring,
reduces our
firing,
role,
the
it
right.
reduces the role of the town, of the board of
Correct.
selectmen typically and puts it in the hands of the town manager.
Correct.
Typically, that's how it happens.
Yeah, so the way, the difference with an administrator, the elected officials, the select board still have the final control. Whereas with a manager, it's a non-elected official that has final control. That's,
I
And that's the big that typically happens.
right.
would argue that what we're currently doing is pretty much the town manager. If Greg decides that, yes, you present a candidate to us and we say yes or no, but we are involved in the selection of candidates for your department heads.
Unless invited to participate in a committee, as Brian and I have done.
Yes, we are invited, we are not.
Invited.
And I can tell you, though, quite honestly, I had that authority, but I would always include members to
Right.
participate because it gets the process
You get the collaboration.
easier, more collaboration, you get stuff done and
And we
people,
don't end up
we
with that
you don't have loggerheads over the issue. So I think that's important too. So even though, if that's what you're doing right now,
Yeah.
then you should reduce it to writing, so you have it there. So when, at some point in time, there's no confusion as to what the responsibilities are. That's critical.
So I think what he's saying is we may have some undocumented practices
Yes.
and.
They're
and-
mostly documented
Well,
in the town
I'm
administrators.
looking at Greg and
If you read that authority, it's very limited.
there may be some undocumented practices and it wouldn't hurt for us to take a peek at it
Yeah.
before we bring in a new town administrator, just to make sure we.
It's a good thing to do anyways, right? I just think it is
We
to have.
kinda did that, but I'm not sure if we missed anything. When we embarked on this process, we may have missed it. It's a good thing to go back to the recruiter and ask, you know, do you think we missed anything? I think we kind of did that already, but
Yeah, so John and Bill
okay,
don't share the same perspective on this 100%.
okay,
You know,
got
two-
it, okay.
Two different perspectives. And I'm not,
Greg, are you getting candidates asking this question? Or candidates for your position, do they begin to ask the
not
question?
that I'm aware of. I mean, they might have asked the recruiter.
I would
Yeah,
think
I
they
don't
would.
think. Well, I can tell you that whenever I was involved, I used to ask that question for that reason, because it was clear as to what the authority was. Because I've been in situations where it wasn't clear and suddenly it changed.
Hmm.
And the authority, and suddenly there was a debate over it, and there was disagreement
Yeah.
upon.
I
So
think
you don't want to,
good
you want
candidate
to
will ask the
avoid that if
question.
you can, as much as possible, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. We should get it down on paper, especially with somebody new coming in.
So just want to make sure we've got it.
I'd like to go to a different question, which is HR.
Sure.
The communities our size, in staffing of HR, which I understand is one of the recommendations in here, does that require a full-time position?
Wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I
Can it still be
I
shared
still
with
would,
another
you still
town?
could share with another community. I actually, because it's not, you don't, again, you don't have a big, it's not a big organization. And so that, and I understand, I've actually thought about this because you could theoretically have a person that's full-time that does this every day. But I would say to you that, is it practical given this, all the other things that you have on your plate right now? The answer is probably not. And also you have a situation where the existing person who is doing it is actually, I think, reducing one of their responsibilities currently. And so the opportunity right now is to increase that without too much of a
So,
challenge.
so what's your perspective though on, what's the total employee count you've got, Greg?
Roughly 70.
70? Okay,
full-time,
yeah, I mean, full-time HR person. For a team that size is like something I've never seen in my life. So I think, I guess I wonder, what your thought is on the HR expertise of his direct reports. It's been my experience that the more experienced the leaders are with handling, if they've had good training in how to handle difficult situations and critical conversations, they need to rely less on an HR professional.
So it's interesting you say that because I was just gonna say to you that the HR person does that training.
So that's what I'm asking. Do you
so-
feel our team could use some additional support in terms of training and education? And then there's a difference between core HR support and labor negotiations. So I didn't
Yes.
really see a clear breakdown on where you think the HR support is needed. Is it labor relations or is it?
I think it's more training, operational training,
Okay.
looking at ways in which you can do things better, ways in which you might be able to utilize computers better. You know, you could have that, you could actually leverage that training from different schools and universities to an HR director. Do that. Coordinate the training. So I would say to you, that's why I struggled with the issue of, it's not that big of an organization, but you do have, but you could actually use a full-time person initially, but then you could easily back off of that. But given the fact you already have a person in place, I would say utilize that person the best you can, existing person.
So a strategy around how we could enhance our HR
Yes.
capabilities is probably what's needed before.
Right, because don't forget, there's all the
Increase in
transactional
hours.
things too, like, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the treasurer's office that's HR related. I mean, benefits and all the things that go into that, in addition to being a person that sits at the table in terms of labor negotiations, that's a whole different aspect of it as well. So a fully effective HR director or HR professional, if you will, can handle a lot of those things and actually save you money in the long term.
So Greg, how many towns do we share with? 2 others or just 1 other? right
There's
now?
2 others right now.
2
It
others?
was 2, and now it's dropping down to.
There's 2.
Because in terms of benefits, right, that's something that typically, could be shared, answering questions, that kind of
Administration
stuff.
of benefits.
Administration of benefits, yeah.
So-
That's different than helping your staff deal with HR
Correct.
issues and,
Historically, that has been the treasurer's role is administering the benefits.
One of the things that came out of that discussions with the treasurer's office is that they're sometimes placed in a difficult position to interpret language that's in contracts, whatever, which is really something that should be done by an HR person.
but that could easily be a shared resource. It doesn't have to be.
So you've got some challenges ahead of you in the sense that, timing wise, the capital issues are the big ones. Organizationally, you can have, those are more shorter term, but even, and not all of the changes that you can make on the organization side can be done initially, but I think probably in a shorter term, let's say 2 to 3 years, you should be able to do that. You can do some this year. There are some very short-term ones we can do this year. And I also think that, but I would get to work on prioritizing the capital needs as soon as possible, because where there's other needs coming about, say, for instance, a school that's being talked about now as well, that needs to get on, that needs to be part of the conversation with the other needs, because you're facing some critical issues that have to be addressed, you know, on a timing basis. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges facing.
I've got a question, Bill.
Sure.
Yeah. So in reviewing the report, I mean, the message came through that our staff, while we could, I guess, use more staff, and you certainly emphasized that they've executed very well.
Yeah.
And that's been to the great benefit of our town. There isn't anyone that's really had big health problems or accident problems and disappeared where we've had to deal with any of that. It's been a very stable group here. Two of the takeaway messages here are restructuring and adding staff to the extent that it really supports the succession planning, because the staff as it stands is executing pretty well. I don't think it's a real strong story to the taxpayer to say that we need more people because we've got to do more stuff. But the restructuring thing is something that I think can be done independent of staff, or are there certain staff changes that really have to be made to make that reorganization work so that there aren't so many direct reports going to the town administrator? So that's my question.
Sure, that's a good question. So there are a number of departments that could actually turn into those roles easily. First of all, you're not going to have a public safety department. You'll have a police chief and a fire chief. I mean, you're not big enough to have a public safety department. So that one's an easy one. But you will look to restructure things such as the harbor master underneath one of those departments. So
I wanted to ask you about that.
yeah, that's, Yep.
So you have the harbor master underneath the fire chief,
yes.
but we don't just have a harbor patrol. We have moorings involved, we have dredging, we have infrastructure.
Mhm.
Shouldn't, in my opinion, the harbor master should still stand on its own. I don't really see it under the fire department.
Well, the reason I put that there is because they actually do support each other when it comes to rescue. And I also think that they do, the harbor master actually does a lot with patrolling the harbor and protecting the harbor.
I get that public safety piece of it, but there's a lot more to the harbor than
I think we could be creative with the public safety, because in fact, the deputy harbor master has a police authority now.
Yep.
Right, so, I mean, there's.
Right, so I think we've done that through hiring department heads who understand how to collaborate with each other really, really well. So they don't need the formality of a one boss structure to do good things together.
Right.
And I guess, I'm kind of aligned with what Jeff is saying. Right now, we feel we have something that works really well. And so touching it scares the crap out of me. I was just like,
Well,
if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
plus, we do have a history here of before Bayern was here and
Yeah.
harbor was under the police department. We had issues there.
I would,
Different
to
skill set.
Kathy's point, I think that one of the things that really works well here in this town is our public safety. All right, all three departments working in conjunction, not for, but with each other. And
Well, part of the reason why I did that was because he's such a limited operator. I mean, he now has a full-time assistant. But that by having them work directly with another department provides more resources for him too as well. So I think that was the reason why I did, was to help to support him.
What resources?
Well, the fire department can actually help him in terms of supporting him on a day-to-day basis as well.
you already do.
You already do.
You already do.
I
They
guess we're not
cross-train.
clear on the gap that you may, if you see a gap that this structure would address, it's not clear to us what that is.
Well, the gap was to try and not to reduce the number of direct reports to the town manager.
So that in and of itself, I think is, it certainly is something the new town administrator will have to come in here, absorb all of this information, and he or she may have a leadership style that aligns with what you're thinking, or they may have a different leadership style, more comfortable leading through influence that doesn't require as much consolidation. So it's really, I think it's great information because it gives them a roadmap to go look at, right? But that person is gonna have to come to us and recommend, here's what I think I need in order to do the job. behind me."
Ultimately, that's what's gonna happen to any one of these recommendations.
Right,
You
exactly.
know, so,
Yeah.
listen, these are just my observations, and I think,
Well, the good observations, it gives them a place to go look.
right, I mean, I'm not married to any one of them in terms of saying, look, you have to do this because otherwise it'll be a disaster. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that structurally, that makes sense to me. And organizationally, it makes sense to do it that way. But if it's your community, you get to decide how you want to structure. And ultimately, the new town manager, new town administrator, if you will say, you know what? I like it the way it is, or, I like the recommendation. I think we should keep it under the fire department, or whoever the case may be. So just.
Like, my concern is that, you hire a fire chief to be a fire chief.
Yep.
And he's not necessarily knowledgeable about harbor,
Maritime law.
right, and all of that. That's really where a harbor master should be reporting to the town administrator,
Yeah.
manager, whatever.
So I think another way of saying that is when you're dealing with public safety leaders, you're dealing with almost like a pseudo military. They are very command and
Yeah,
control.
very command and
okay?
control, yeah, that's right.
Other leaders that report to Greg, they don't need to be worried about that, right? But when you're talking about a command and control structure like in the military, they have a certain way of operating. You mess with that,
That's right.
you're dealing with stuff you don't want to use.
And like I said, you're in a position now where not only is the town administrator leaving, but also the harbor master could be gone in a short period too. So I think that if that happens, obviously you're looking at an opportunity. Yeah, so it could be an opportunity to look at it again. So, other thoughts, questions?
When you've done these reports for other towns, how long do towns take to sort of try to implement this? Is this sort of a 18-month, or is this a 5-year, or how does this kind of line up on a?
What I'd like to say to towns is that you do this within the next 12 months. At least some pieces of it. You don't have to do it all in 1 year. But the organizational piece, you should start looking at within the next 12 months. It's a little bit challenging right now because you're heading into a new budget season, but hopefully you've addressed some of those concerns in the next budget on some of the recommendations at least. But I will say that a 12-month period is a reasonable time frame because a lot can happen in a year, and you're going to have a transition of authority in the town administrator's office anyways. But that in of itself will garner more discussion around those points. So I think, I think 12 to 18 months is a reasonable time frame, but you like to see at least it doesn't get shelved, that the project doesn't get shelved. Because these are things that are important issues, and that you take some real action steps to try and address the organizational needs.
It's probably, and you probably caught it already, but you suggest that the parking clerk, that's currently a function of the town clerk.
Mhm.
And that has a certain balancing effect between the person who gives the ticket and the person who adjudicates it. Having them both in the police department, or as you said in the report on the fire department, I think that was.
Yeah, that was a typo. That was a typo. I apologize for that. So that has to be the police department. Actually, if you look at the line down below, it says police department.
It does say.
Yeah, so it's inconsistent. So I apologize for that. But yeah, no, it's definitely the police department. And the reason I say that is because you can actually have that adjudicated in the following way. You have a lieutenant or a sergeant that can oversee that, and then they adjudicate the ticket. And if somebody wants to appeal, they're going to appeal it to the chief. And that's how I've seen it happen in a lot
That's
of
a
places.
command and control structure, really unified.
But the amount of times that happens in a community like this is
You'd be
probably.
surprised.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, yeah, for the summer group, I suppose that's probably an issue. But I have to tell you that I have worked in many organizations where it's like that, and it's worked really, really well. I mean, and it's, the reason why you don't like to keep it. The people who are most knowledgeable about the tickets is the police department. They know whether a person really, parked inappropriately. I mean, for somebody else to make that decision, I actually had to serve as the clerk in some cases. As that, and it was difficult for me to make that decision because I wasn't familiar with the situation at all. I relied almost entirely on what the police officer told me, and then I had to make a decision. And 9 out of 10 times I had to side with the police officer. So that's my point is that it's structured that way. I recommend it for that reason, is that it's not uncommon to see that.
Thank you.
I have a flip side on that is, because I heard just this week, someone was questioning to me, why do we need a parking clerk? Because they're all adjudicated by an outside vendor. Is that true or not?
No,
No.
no. The collection
part of it's for an outside.
actually, the ticket is created initially by a post.
Right.
But it is somebody from the police department looks at each of the entries and says, yes or no, that is in fact a violation.
And that's only what, maybe 40% of the, I don't know. how
That's
many,
the police department.
I mean, we still have a parking, we still
Once it is set
have,
out, yeah.
The physical people.
people walking out there. That just eliminates.
Somebody has to appeal their ticket.
Yeah, I forgot the fact, you probably have quite a few in the summertime. But I kind of,
No.
but seriously, I think structurally, is I stand by, I stand by the recommendation, but look, if you think it works better in a different way, that's fine, you can have that internal discussion. But I've actually seen it work well under the.
I agree. It might be worth discussion with the next town administrator. I remember our past town clerk had a concern about being the parking clerk. I don't know how the new town clerk feels about it. I haven't asked her.
She hasn't been through it for a summer yet.
Okay. So yeah, so it's not a.
We'll see if she's still
New
here.
Town clerk, we'll have a new, yeah, it wouldn't hurt to, it's another good thing to poke at. Like you said, it's good information.
So like I said, this is why these conversations are good, because you can look at it from both perspectives and kick it around, and if it's not the right, if Manchester by the Sea is not comfortable with any one recommendation, you can have that conversation. I mean, I encourage you to have it. So but again, I go based upon my experiences and best practices, so to speak.
Some of the advisory boards are functionally advisory boards to the select board, I think.
Yes.
And you kind of have the select board off in a corner and doing our knitting quietly by ourselves. And I wonder, why it is that all of those boards which make recommendations on policy should go through the departments.
Well, because you're the chief policy board, all right, and the reason why.
Shouldn't we have advice?
Yes, so ultimately, when the recommendations come up through the departments, they should come back to you. Ultimately, so you make the ultimate decisions.
That's
For
very
policies.
filtered information.
I'm sorry,
That's very filtered information.
I'm not sure I understand that, though, that point.
Oh,
The committees sometimes provide a check and balance to make sure that the town staff is providing services in a manner desired by the residents, I would
Right.
say. There's a check and balance there.
Okay.
It's a small town and people like to know that they can advise the select board directly on certain things. However, I do see some committees here which were supposed to be gone, Greg, so I don't know why we still have some of these here, because we retired some of them. So some of them should be, I'm gonna double check the list here. And some of them we did move to advisory, like, I think the ADA was when we
ADA was
moved to
advisory.
advise the DPW, we did that already. So I just think, I'm not sure this is 100% accurate.
That ADA is listed in Public Works, right? So,
Yeah, under current it should be. But some of the committees that are listed in the proposed org chart shouldn't even exist. They were gone, I thought, so.
what I meant by filtered is that if the department head isn't interested in an idea that's coming from one of the advisory boards, it doesn't get to us.
That's a staff challenge.
It is.
But if we don't know what we don't know,
So I have to make some assumptions when I put the recommendations together is that there is a continuous flow of information back to the town administrator on these things. And if there is a challenge from a particular department head, that has to be addressed.
I would say it a little bit differently. I would say, because I agree with what Ann is poking at here. I think we, to your point about not having the operational meetings, right, every week, okay, that's standard practice. Yes, we should be doing that. But there are some things that we don't see as a board every quarter, okay? Certain metrics or certain, what's the feedback from the residents? We could do things differently by asking, DPW to come in here every quarter and say, okay, what are you getting from feedback from these committees? What, we could
You still could do
manage
that.
that
Yeah,
differently
you
if
still
the
can do that,
committees
absolutely.
reported into the DPW. That's how I,
Yeah, so think of it from the perspective that you're really the board of directors, if you will. And what happens is that if the board wants certain information to come out of the departments, the operating departments, you filter that through the town administrator, he then brings it to all the department heads, they bring it back to you.
well, the department heads present to the board in a public meeting.
Oh, absolutely.
And certainly then the committee heads would see that meeting and if they're, be attending at that meeting, if the department head didn't represent their feedback, then that would certainly, could be made known
Well,
immediately.
you would definitely have the board before you to talk about the issues that you have. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
I didn't see this as the board reporting up to the department head. I just saw it more as for administrative support.
They're all connected for a reason, because they all
Yeah.
advise each other.
Well, some of them we did change to be advisory to department head instead of advisory to
Yep.
the select board.
Yep.
But most of them still remained advisory to the select board, but if we were to change our modus operandi, you could have some more committees report directly to department heads, but once again, that's a question for the next town administrator and their leadership style. What would they, how do they want to run their team?
Right.
And we could get a different perspective from the person.
Yeah, everybody has their own style.
Right.
That's how it works. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Very good information.
Hope this was helpful and instructive, and hopefully it'll provide you some good food for thought for the next manager or town administrator or whatever that person is gonna be titled. And that organizationally, you'll come up with some changes. All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The town of Foxborough.
17,000, actually 18,000. They just.
Except on game day.
Everybody thinks that Foxborough is being a city. It's actually it's a small town. But yeah, game day, it's close to 70,000. We can always be better. All right, nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
okay. The next item in this joint meeting is the, well, some item is the operating budget. It's easy.
So, finance committee is very close to being done. Their set of recommendations, I have a few more to go. The changes from the preliminary budget one way to look at it. There's been some additions. The finance committee did approve moving forward with adding an accounting clerk in order to move forward with that finance director model. So freeing up some of current town accountant's time in order to take on the additional roles in the finance director. One way to do that would be to bring in that additional support. So that was one. The preliminary budget had the recommendation of boosting the assistant town clerk position, assistant to the town clerk, from half-time to full-time. So that has been endorsed by the finance committee as well. And then thirdly, the finance committee does recommend going forward on a truncated basis for this coming year for the deputy fire chief. So they are recommending that come the fourth quarter of FY26, so next April, move forward with that new position. And then obviously come FY27, that would be a full-time position. So easing into it a little bit rather than doing it 100% in FY26. So those are probably the more significant changes to the preliminary budget that you saw in December.
So are we positioning these? I mean, I did want to make sure we talk about these proposed headcount increases. Are we positioning these as placeholders, financial placeholders? Because again, I just, you gotta let the new person come in and assess their team and have their say. We weren't considering making any structural changes before the new town administrator walks through the door, right?
So this is for the 26 budget, that starts July 1.
Right.
So I'm assuming that the new person will be on board by then or shortly thereafter.
I guess let me say it differently. I would feel it's very disrespectful to a new leader to demand that they adhere to a particular structure. I mean, I'm certainly fine with putting some budget placeholders in there in case they agree with these
It provides that option,
recommendations.
right?
Provides an option.
Provides that option.
And the reason I'm careful with this messaging is there are potential promotions as part of this budget approval. And I just feel very strongly that you have to let a new leader come in, assess their staff, put their own stamp on how they think they need to structure an organization. And it's nice to have some placeholders because of some prior recommendations, but this shouldn't be viewed by the staff in town hall as a done deal if the town approves it. That's my concern. I wouldn't want to be disrespectful to a new leader.
I think you're expecting too much of a new town administrator coming in, that it's historically, it's typical, you come into a town and you get a structure and
Get a structure, yeah.
to, we need to move ahead with that finance director because we need somebody to be in charge of these budgets and not the town administrator. And to me, to push everything off to a new town administrator.
I'm not saying push everything off, but
nothing will get done.
To Greg's point, what my concern is about promising promotions to people, and then have a new leader show up, a couple of weeks later. It just feels wrong. It's not how.
But the finance committee doesn't recommend placeholders. We budget for
just
specific things. We feel strongly enough.
Well,
Charging
the finance
taxpayers.
committee, what I'm hearing the finance committee wants is one person who's responsible for the budget preparation that is not the town administrator. That's what I'm hearing.
Well,
But I'm confused because I thought Andrea did that. So that's maybe where I'm not understanding.
No.
it's also a functional change and
Yeah.
also, I think, support for a goal. Backup.
Yeah, no, understand. I just, I've never had a restructuring done by committee before, so this is news. to me.
So we have, I and reinforced with Bill have advocated for a finance director for a number of years now. And we have slowly worked our way towards that goal. I do think that particular goal is ready to move forward. And it's certainly the TA will certainly have a major hand in the budget still. It's not 100% handoff to the finance director, but in terms of finance director has more responsibility for overseeing, supervising
Mhm.
treasurer and the assessor, and that those three departments form a more cohesive team under that finance director role.
Well, if we were to go forward with this before a new leader comes in, I would want to add some additional responsibilities to that role.
Right, no,
Because
that was the goal.
No, I'm just saying above what you just mentioned. Because, as I mentioned earlier during the operational presentation, this should be the most highly automated department that we have. So when we start talking about adding, clerks and administrative positions, there are other ways of handling that. And I would want a finance director to come up with an automation strategy for that organization that includes partnering with other cities and towns so that we can do something other than hire people to get work done. Something a little higher level than just supervising more people. That's what I'm saying.
Right. I mean,
I think
Yeah.
we didn't realize that these positions had not yet been discussed.
They've been discussed. I don't recall we voted on hiring a finance director. I don't recall that. If we voted on that, I haven't missed any meetings, but I certainly have not
correct.
voted.
So this
for
is,
that.
this is where. This is,
That's where your role, you get to just, you are there.
Right.
You get to organize, you set up the organization the way you think it would work best.
100%. And that is exactly my point. If Greg wasn't leaving, I would have no problem with this. This would be the current town administrator coming to the board and saying, I need this to happen. It's going to make my life easier. It's going to do better for I have no problem with that conversation. Conversation we're having is, let's do a reorganization. And, oh, by the way, there's going to be a new leader coming in. I've just never had that experience before. When I go into a new leadership role, the very first thing I do is assess my staff, assess my budget, assess my customers, and then I get to make some changes if I think things need to improve. I don't have it spoon fed to me. So this is something I'm not familiar with, and that's why I'm asking the questions.
Can I ask this? What would be the difference if we already had this person here and you had a new administrator come in?
What I'm just saying as a leader, you typically want to have a say in how your team is formed. And
No, I
you know what I'm
understand
saying?
what you're saying, but what I'm saying is if a year ago we hired that person.
Yeah, and that
What would
person
be
was
the-
sitting there right now? I have no problem.
No,
with those. Okay.
we hired a finance director
Yeah.
a year ago.
Yeah.
What would be the difference with somebody new coming in?
Oh, someone new coming in, I would say, still should have the opportunity to assess their staff, assess what they're given for resources and recommend changes. That's, any leadership change involves that. I've never encountered a leadership change where someone just comes in and is not allowed to make changes or recommendations. So that's why
And
I'm,
it's not allowed.
Yeah.
You're sounding a little bit, no, I'm not even going in that direction.
I'm just trying to understand. It's not, I'm not.
We're planning now for FY 26.
Right.
We need to make decisions about FY 26
Understand.
on April 28th.
Understand.
We can't say now that, oh, it's too late.
You understand?
So
I think the point also is that FY 26 starts July 1.
Yeah.
Right? So we're not hiring anyone. until the new TA is
No,
here.
my sensitivity here is
Right.
because there are promotions involved, okay? And
And they're part of the budget and we're talking about them now.
I'm talking about not from a budget standpoint, more from a career standpoint.
Well, they're here for a budget, that's,
So,
these people are
That's
numbered,
why-
they look down columns, that's. they
yeah,
don't
no,
think
I'm
about
understanding,
interview
but
size
I'm
columns.
concerned about from a more of a career standpoint. I mean, I made a bad assumption
I'm
that,
concerned because this is a position that's been talked about with people who are currently in our organization.
Yeah. understand.
And the
Part of the
impact
budget process.
as part of the budget
Mhm.
process.
So
Yeah.
to that
So-
point, a new TA is gonna come in knowing that he's got, or she,
It's got the money to
he's
do.
got the money to hire.
And I'm okay with,
Is that fair?
I don't think the discussion was to hire a finance director.
that's more concerned, yeah.
It was to hire an accounting clerk.
Yes.
The finance director was gonna be an internal candidate.
Okay.
That's what we were led to believe.
And that's what the internal candidate has been elected to be. which is
Exactly.
Kind of a horrifying thing to do to somebody.
That's exactly my point, yes.
I'm not sure I follow how that's your point.
My point is, I think there was an assumption that we had already made a decision to,
We don't make that decision. Greg makes that decision.
I'm sorry, excuse me, that the timing around this is what is disturbing to me. That's okay. So we have to, when we interview the candidates for the TA, basically, they're gonna be inheriting a structure. And if they want, what you're saying is if they want to make changes to that structure, that would happen in the following budget year.
But that's always the case.
Well, I'm just saying, well, I guess what I'm saying
That would be
is,
for any position, right?
I mean,
You always had that situation.
I worked for a large corporation.
Yeah.
I didn't get to come into a new position and say, I want to get rid of you, I want to get rid of you, I want to get rid of you. I had to work with what I was given
Okay.
and over time.
Yeah.
Develop
Understand.
it to what I wanted.
understand,
And this is the same type of situation.
Yeah. understand. I'm just sensitive because when we talk about promoting people, I think that needs to be handled with more care than what we did in this situation, but I'll just stop right now.
Oh, we're talking, this is all this time just on a clerk.
Right.
Well, I think all of these new hires that are involved, certainly the new TA would have something to say about that, in terms of who that person is
So
as an external candidate.
yeah, the budget as is proposed right now proposes one new hire at the start of the fiscal year. and
Right.
one- And one new hire 3/4 into the fiscal year.
And a half.
That's correct. And the new hire at the start of the fiscal
Oh,
year, I
yeah.
can understand that the TA probably would have something, the new TA starting on or about that time would have something to say about who that person might be.
Correct. So I don't know what else you want to dive into in terms of the details of the operating budget. I focused on those
Yeah.
staffing positions because
Yes.
that was the change from what you had
Mhm.
seen back in December.
Well, town clerk, that was purely for backup purposes. The assistant town.
Backup in workload.
Well, the workload, I'm not buying them because when we discussed the notary, adding the notary service last April, we talked about the fact that staffing in the town clerk's office was sufficient to absorb that, you know, with no issue. And I specifically asked, you know, you guys aren't gonna come at the next budget cycle and ask for more staffing, right?
It's not
And-
being driven by
Right.
notary
I
needs.
understand, I'm just saying in general, it seems to be not driven by workload based on what I saw in the operational report, but I'm curious as to what the workload is, what new information did we get? Because when we talked about staffing last April, there was no discussion about increased headcount, so I'm just trying to
You also have a new
understand.
you also have a new town clerk now.
I understand, but I'm
So-
just, is that the only piece of information?
Oh, no, she gave
Or
a
is-
presentation. to us.
Right, so, I think the real concern is anytime the clerk is away, then that
So
office
it's backup.
is empty half the time.
It's a backup, that's what I was trying to get at, not workload.
Well, we can
Well,
increase workload, we can shift
That's
workload.
part of workload, right? So when it's not staffed, that work isn't getting done. The people there's no way to service the counter, that sort of thing.
Could some of that be done by Blue Cross training? For example, could somebody from the treasurer's office learn to sell dog licenses?
So the short answer is yes. And you could look at that, accounting clerk as a possibility.
Mhm.
As having a dual role. That could be something that.
That's an excellent suggestion, and the reason I'm really poking hard at this stuff, folks, is obviously this is a really difficult budget year, again. We haven't even talked about the stuff on the capital list, and we're talking about adding, a couple of extra headcount to administrative positions. It's not a good look to the taxpayer. So I'm just trying to poke real hard at administrative add-ons because they are in areas that typically you wouldn't be adding administrative headcount,
Well, I think that for the
so.
clerk, we took away a lot of the beach. Parks and Rec took over the, like the selling of the tags, beach tags. Maybe that goes back to if we have a part-time, or a full-time assistant clerk, maybe that takes it off of Parks and Recs plate, puts it back downstairs.
Or the parking clerk that we talked about earlier, if that were to move under the police department, would that free up some of the work? I don't know what the specifics are of the workload that are driving the need for the other.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
She also told us that one of the challenges in her office recently has been the substantial increase in the number of public information requests.
Yes, and that can be handled through other means potentially, so that's.
You
It
gotta,
goes to but it goes to the clerk's office.
Yes,
yeah, and you gotta have somebody there, you gotta have somebody posting agendas.
Yeah.
We've had issues with public hearings recently that haven't been able to be held because agendas weren't posted. Yeah. That office is under tight timeframes to respond to things.
It's basically, she's also the face of the town. That's the first, when people walk in, they're gonna go to the clerk's office.
Kind of useful for you guys to hear the second discussion that we had. Not sure, made a pretty good case. for-
did we hear that? Did I miss something?
No, we didn't
We
hear it,
didn't
I
hear
guess
that,
that's the
so
point.
I
is
think
that
that's
we didn't
part of the
hear that.
disconnect is we're being asked to approve additional funding for staffing and, so when Greg's asked us, well, what do you want to hear in the budget? I want to hear about the increased headcount. I want to understand why, because that's something that the taxpayers, I would think are gonna poke at. And right now, I don't have good answers.
Right, and it's the
So,
role of
I
the
guess-
finance committee to recommend budget to the select.
Right, but I think headcount and structure, that's a select board responsibility to implement, so I just think we need to understand.
We do not,
Implement's the wrong word.
yeah,
Sorry. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, that implement's the wrong word, but there's the budget and there's the people aspect, right? And there's the structure and they all have to coalesce, but
and
Happy to have the town clerk and the town accountant come to your next meeting and make that presentation. That's
So-
easily arranged.
I know I pushed back. I felt like what Kathy was saying was small town, the way to do the redundancy is to try to get people to wear more hats. And I felt like we had planned the new hire for the parking and that would be enough for this year, and we'll see how that fits in. But I know accounting is gonna be busy next year because of breaking in a new town administrator. But I felt like the promotion and the assistant clerk boost was too much for 1 year. It was a 40% raise.
Yeah.
And then to look at the whole government departments, each one, there's a lot of double-digit raises in succession, like,
But Dean, we voted as a committee.
yes, we did. I'm
And
just
it
saying
was
that,
6-1
right,
in favor of the budget that's here now.
yes, and
So-
I'm fine with that. But I just did say that, I share the concern and that, operating budgets, once you raise those, they don't go back down. They're every year, and with all our capital costs that we have coming up, we really need to,
So let me ask a question, Greg,
this-
the accounting clerk, that seems to be a pretty junior position. Is that something that does that have to be an employee? Could that be done with contract labor at all, or?
Not sure where you would find that contract labor, but
I don't know, that's why I'm asking.
Are you talking the clerk's office?
The accounting
Like a temp.
clerk.
There's still a lot of information I think they should
I
stay.
mean,
I'm just asking, I mean, obviously hiring a additional headcount is a serious commitment, it's a long-term commitment all the way through retirement and pension, so I'm just.
What was
Looking at
pointed,
that,
what
you
was
know.
pointed out to us in the discussion was that there are certain things that occur in the treasurer's office and the accountant's office that have to be kept separate.
Separation of duties.
Yes. So that although they can help each other a lot, you still needed somebody available to do things which are time sensitive. And you've got one person, and that's a problem. We're really thin. We have no backup.
We have added headcount to public safety.
Right.
And we're talking about adding another one, yep.
Wild event.
we had one at DPW.
And I trying to understand. I think part of it is your desire to see everything automated and therefore you shouldn't need to have a person to do it.
It's just, these are pretty permanent decisions. I mean.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's just not a good look when we haven't even talked about the capital stuff. We've got to deal with the increasing the operations budget to add headcount for administrative roles is typically. So I felt that.
I just
Important
want
that I
to
point
add that I
yeah.
think that, and let's talk, stay in the clerk's office.
Mhm.
It's gotta be an interactive position.
Yeah, I'm not
And
saying.
so
that.
automating something like
No,
that.
I'm talking about behind the scenes stuff, when you're dealing with, some of what they do is compliance, and there's a lot of compliance related stuff in the accounting, finance areas. And when you get to that level of maturity, you don't need as many. So we're not there yet, I get that.
I think I'm going to suggest that we have the presentations that Greg has suggested at our next meeting. And then we move on to the capital budget.
Yeah. And I think it would be good for anybody else who's interested from the resident standpoint. They may not have joined the finance committee meetings either, where that was discussed, and they can ask their questions there as well.
So. Okay.
there's a handout.
Oh, there is.
I don't know who RF is, but
Unmute yourself, RF, identify yourself, and share your wisdom.
no, they took their hand down.
Okay.
Maybe they didn't mean to raise their hand.
Click that wrong button.
So, yeah, they took their hand. So on the capital budget, for next year, Um, The um, biggest changes include not doing the library window repair project for as much as originally recommended. That was originally thought to be a $200,000 project. With further review, it's a $50,000 project, which CPC has recommended funding for. So that has been taken out. What has been added in is funding for the rotunda. That's anticipated to be a $2.3 million project. Our original thinking was to receive two different grants for $1 million each, one from Seaport Council and another from CZM, and then 300,000 from CPC. CPC has recommended the 300,000, which is the Finance Committee approved as well. But we have learned that this CZM grant is not a high probability. They have significantly less money to award this year, and they are focusing on projects that directly protect people. So we do not feel that Rotunda will rank high. We will still apply and still try. We may get some money, but we're not going to get $1 million from them. So it was recommended to add 800,000 for the rotunda and to seek additional funding through the CPC. They don't have the full 200,000 more to make that a $500,000 allocation. They could go as high as 440. And so a couple of options. One, we could do some bonding using CPC and have them pay for it over multiple years. We could dip into additional fund balance to make up that $60,000 difference, or slightly reduce one of the other capital projects to try to come up with that full amount for the rotunda. So there's some options there, but that was a significant change from what you saw originally. And then the last significant change is adding more money into road resurfacing. Originally, the projection was for about $900,000 worth of resurfacing, repaving, particularly Pleasant Street. We do not have bids in yet, but indications are that the bids will be coming in higher. And so Chuck was able to do some recalculating, and it could come in as high as 1.3 million. So that's an additional $400,000. And so again, we have some higher fund balance numbers, about $1 million more in fund balance. And so the suggestion was, I'm sorry, $1.1 million plus 150 being returned from the library because they did not get the grant. So that money also flows into fund balance. So it was taking 1.2 million in fund balance, 800 for the rotunda, and 400 more for road surfacing. So that was those represent the big changes to the capital from what you saw back in the fall.
Is there any risk that when the rotunda is displaced, we'll discover that it's not a historic preservation, but a reconstruction problem? And will that affect our ability to use CPC funds?
So they're fearful that the rotunda itself.
Wooden structures on the water
Right.
tend to have,
Surprises or.
yeah, and none of them are pleasant. I mean, can the CPC be used for what I sometimes call grandfather's axe? Same axe, two new handles, two new heads.
It was deemed eligible.
As long as it's certainly within keeping.
It's recreational, right?
That's right, there's
That's
a
fine.
recreational part of the CPC, would it at least fall under that, or? Open
It could,
space,
it qualifies for both.
There's a lot of kids jumping off that thing for
there you
recreation.
go.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
and they're gonna have a better jump.
5 more feet to, well, at low tide, they'll have 5 more feet to go.
Well, that's another. I immediately thought that, you know, I always liked the 3-foot raise option, and that's.
That's
Oh,
already
wait,
litigated.
no,
We've litigated
sorry.
that one.
We, I'm not
It's done.
gonna take that one on again.
Yeah, okay. It would have made up the difference. And got us to the 22nd.
Back to $300,000 that we gave to Greenbelt.
Right.
That still bothers me. I don't see that here.
That
was
was the
last
last
year.
year's
That
budget.
was last year, we did ask that question, but it was last year.
I
Okay,
want
so
money back. Can we ask for
we're
money back?
reasonably comfortable that,
We're reasonably comfortable that, yes, that it
whatever the
qualifies.
contractor decides to do to get the rotunda out of the way, so.
Right.
Okay, good. And I know the discussion at the finance committee about the paving, that Chuck said, well, he could do it for cheaper, but
It's not the right job.
it's not the right job.
Prices have gone up, but that's what that's.
And looking at the winter we're having, makes sense to put more money. into it.
I see everybody nodding. This is really nice.
I can't believe what's happened to the sidewalk in some years.
Oh, you know what, we forgot during the operational budget discussion to discuss the, we said we were gonna talk about snow removal on sidewalks. And whether or not there was equipment needed to properly do them, you know, what were the expectations for sidewalk snow clearing? That's not on our action item list, and I forgot about that, but we wanted to make sure that we understood the expectations. Do they have the right equipment? Because a lot of people were not happy this year.
I think that the part of the problem was that we just had, there was a confluence. of
Yeah,
Events that made.
There were some problems that happen every year that there have been questions about sidewalks in particular. When do they get done, and do they have the right equipment? Because they keep telling us
So in talking
things are on the way.
to Chuck, he doesn't feel it's an equipment issue.
Okay,
He's happy to come in and.
is it a training
have
issue?
a Discussion about what the expectations are.
Can we put that on the action item list so we don't forget it
It's
again?
on the- He's gonna have
Because-
on the website.
No, I understand, and it's not accurate, so that's why we said we were gonna discuss it. It was, I think at our last meeting, we said we were gonna have a discussion
Yeah.
on expectations. We just forgot again, so I'm just asking if we can, should we have that discussion?
Yeah, so we can tee that up for the 18th.
Okay, but there's nothing we need to worry about from a budget perspective. He's got it covered.
So, okay, we've got the.
Well, and Kathy, the snow budget is the one we can go over.
Right, I didn't understand if equipment was different than
Oh,
snow budget, you know, so that's why I was asking that question. Yep.
Okay, I think we covered the changes in the capital budget. Unless anybody has. Okay, the next item is the FY 26 school budget. Which is none of us here.
So what we have plugged in to the overall budget is a 6.29 or 7.29.
Yeah, where are we at? Is it the trailer or the fix that I lost track?
7.29, yeah. So that assumes what the school has presented as sort of Model A in the modeling. It assumes a 27% increase on their health insurance, which is the big driver there. And some reduction in administrative staff going forward.
Further.
The middle school principal.
Okay, they're not talking about anything beyond middle school principal and finance director.
Facility,
And
no,
the facility.
facility director.
I'm sorry,
We heard about
And-
4 weeks.
Yeah, okay.
Correct. And then there's some reduction in sections at the high school as they shift staff to um, elementary school.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I heard that. So the 7.2
Nine,
budget, or whatever, presumes no middle school principal and no facilities. That's what you're saying. Okay, I just want to make sure I
Yep.
only caught part of the conversation.
That was the mid-range one, right?
Right.
And it had the 27% insurance increase.
That factors the 20%.
correct. So that's our assessment increase. Essex would have around 8% increase.
Oh, the 7.2 is our.
It's our apportionment share increase. So, the school committee is meeting tomorrow evening to further talk about their budget. With the goal of making a final decision on the 18th. So as I say, the budget that was given in your packet assumed that 7.29 increase. It's it's roughly $1 million more from Manchester. So, how Essex responds to that, they certainly will require an override to do that. They were not successful in passing an override last year. So it's a bit of a question mark, obviously, going forward.
But we don't need an override in order to absorb that.
So we have enough excess levy capacity. So what we're showing is a 3.5% increase, so that's a percentage point higher than
She's
Prop 2.5
not
limitation.
using unused levy capacity.
I'm sorry.
I don't think she's using unused levy capacity. I think the 660 is the capital exclusion, which brings the total to the 3.5 increase.
Sure, you can view it that way. It's all depends on how you want to.
Because that's, she's showing additional unused levy capacity this year.
Yeah, I thought we said we didn't want to use up the.
We still have unused levy capacity even with this higher number, but it does go down.
It's 659.
Right, but if without that school increase, it would have been 1.3 in excess levy capacity. So the reason why I view it that way is because that capital exclusion was the same this year as next year, so there's no change from a taxpayer's out-of-pocket perspective. But it's all
Fungible.
right. It's a little fungible in terms of how you view it. So needless to say, the current proposal that we're showing in the budget may not get approved at the Essex Town meeting. Obviously, there's a question at Manchester, but I'm less doubtful about Manchester's vote than I am Essex's vote. And it could well be this is the year we have to go to a super town meeting. We just don't know.
Or the school, if the override is turned down, the school committee can
Come back with a,
make further reductions. And then the question is, will Manchester produce?
Right.
Prove.
right, we come into that dynamic.
When Essex's town meeting is after us, right?
It's the week after us.
Oh, it is? Well, because ours is late, so.
Yeah, theirs is always done in early May.
Oh, okay.
And the it's possible that it will pass our meeting and fail at the ballot as an override. And that's happened before, and then we have another town meeting. Two separate towns.
Question, Ann or Greg? So is the intention to use the extra levy capacity for the extra monies that are needed strategically? Does it make sense to use that or to look at an override for us as well?
So, Sarah, go ahead. You guys, you talked about that.
We talked about it, John, and I think that what we decided was it wasn't that much money that was needed as an override, so it didn't make sense. We didn't want to do the entire increase in the school budget as an override because that would be a lot. And the delta's only about $300,000.
Okay, so it's pretty small.
Yeah, so it just didn't, because originally I really wanted to do it with an override to have people vote in the ballot, but as the numbers come out, it just didn't make, we decided it didn't make sense.
Okay, I understand for the low number, you're asking a lot of people to do a lot of thinking for a small number.
Right.
So,
The other thing is we're planning to have a pretty big override next year.
yes,
No, it isn't that.
or in 2 years.
I hope.
It isn't.
Well, it's gonna be another one. Right?
No,
There
But,
will be another one.
DPAS and DPW.
Those will be. So those are debt exclusions, not an override, just
Not
the
override.
the terminology.
That's borrowing with.
Okay. Right.
We've already approved that.
Okay, but outside the cap limit. The 2.5%, yeah.
Debt over.
It's a capital. Right.
Yeah, okay. Money out of
Well,
pocket.
they are significantly different.
I know they are, but as far as what you're paying.
I don't think we can make any more progress on the school budget than we have made. I think we all understand where it is.
Dial in tomorrow and find
I'll
out.
be there tomorrow, sitting on my hands. Maybe one of them over in my mouth to keep from doing something really stupid.
Maybe you need some duct tape.
Thank you, Sarah. One beach facilities grants,
So, looking at, again, we talked at length about this at the finance committee the other night, walking through a really complicated spreadsheet, that shows, and if people want to have it in front of them, I can walk through it again as well.
can you just put it up on the screen?
Sure.
In case there's somebody outside who's looking at this and trying to imagine what we're talking about.
Yes.
It's a good spreadsheet. I mean, it's, you know.
The upside of the FinCom coming to our meeting is we get the comfortable seats.
I know.
Look at you guys, look at you guys.
Sit up here, it's like,
I mean, you know, we've got our desks,
Got our
we've got our
desks.
tables.
Room at the table. I moved over.
Okay, this is a slightly revised version than what I handed you. But it's very, very, very similar.
This version 4,
This is version 4 revised slightly.
so you didn't send
That's
us
version
version
4.1.
4.1. 4.1.
Release date.
I just did it late this, I saw a couple of errors in version 4. It's minor, but I can highlight it for you. I will certainly send this out to everybody. So we begin on the far left, listing the possible projects. Now, obviously, lots of assumptions, but this is a stab at what if we did all of these? Is there any way to afford it all? And so We have, starting off, the water and sewer, that's already been approved. That was approved last year for 7.5 million. And I'm assuming a 15-year bond for payback. And so I'm showing it partially in play, half of it in play for FY 26. So it would cost, the debt service on half of that is 315,000 in 26. And then on down, you can see the various projects: dredging, PFAS, Tappan Street, Bennett Street, DPW garage, the Essex Elementary School, public safety building, a town hall rehab, various resiliency projects, including culvert redos and seawall improvements. And then at the very end of this 25-year period, a major investment in relocating the sewer plant for 2050. So those amounts in millions are shown. And then the terms of those bonds from 10 to 30 years. So what's the new debt service for those projects for each, a cumulative debt service each year for the different debt services as they get implemented. And then we have revenue sources. So then here I'm showing the water capital fee. That's the meter fees that have been imposed that people got for the first time in the most recent water bill. So that'll amount to 500,000 a year. So that's how I'm anticipating paying for FY 26's water projects in terms of borrowed monies. Some monies for PFAS and some monies for the water and sewer upgrades. Other revenues, phasing in the CST project when it comes online and starts paying property taxes. I'm showing reallocation of town debt. So as we retire existing town debt, reallocate those dollars to help pay for new town debt. Similarly for school debt. As that school debt rolls off, reallocating it to pay for new debt. As we retire our liabilities for retirees, the OPEB liability, which is health insurance, and the pension liability. So again, when those roll off, we can then reallocate those dollars that we're currently using and also start drawing down the OPEB fund. So once it's fully funded, we can start drawing it, we can start using those dollars to help with that annual expense. So then I show tax revenue needed, and then the cumulative tax revenue, and then what's added new tax. So for 26, for next year, I'm not showing any new taxes needed for the debts. I'm showing 5.75 million in new bonded monies, 3.75 for the water project, the meters, and 2 million for starting in on the PFAS work. Being paid for by that water meter fee of 500,000.
That's a bonding of, I didn't write it down and I've forgotten already. Bonding,
7.5, which was approved last year, which we haven't actually bonded for yet. So we probably, what we do is an bond anticipation note
yeah.
for this 26.
I am interested because there's a fair amount of agitation online about we're not doing anything, we're poisoning ourselves with our water. And it would be nice to have a number to say, this is what we expect to spend on this project.
If you look at the very bottom, Ian,
Yeah, so
PFAs are 2 million in
Okay.
26 and then 6 million in 27.
right.
Two,
28 is nothing.
okay. Fine, got it. Okay, thank you.
So this then continues. So in 27, I'm showing the full amount of that original 7.5 being bonded and costing now $630,000 a year in debt service. More PFAS money, so now that's up to $672,000 a year in payments. We start the Tappan Street project, we start the DPW garage. So that new amount of debt service is 1.5, and then how does that get paid for? We use some of the revenue sources that we can redirect or have to put towards it. But also we have that 460,000 in new taxation needed. And that would result in a 1.5% tax needed to raise that additional money above and beyond whatever operating expense increase there is. So if it was a typical year of 2 to 2.5% for your operating expense, you'd be looking at that 3.5 to 4% overall tax increase.
Greg,
So this continues year after year when the different projects come on board. What I'm trying to show in the color bands is when the full amount of that new bond is being paid for. So again, in 27, we have the full 7.5 being fully loaded. In 28, we have the full 2.5 in dredging fully loaded. In 29, we're showing the full 4 million for Tappan Street fully loaded.
aren't we doing dredging every 10 years?
I'm sorry?
Aren't we doing dredging every 10 years? A different section every 10 years? So don't we need to,
So I haven't
Continue.
included that in this model.
okay,
The reason I didn't include it was I'm making the assumption that it'll be self-supporting for the next round with the additional revenues for the transient dock, increased mooring fees, et cetera. Again, lots of assumptions that are in this model. And assumptions that will no doubt change as time rolls along.
Do we have to hit a flag before our total debt service hits 10% of our budget? Is that a number we want to try to stay under through all this or look at? Wasn't that like a accounting for bond ratings and stuff?
It was a target,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
so that might be something we're getting close to. And it's down the road.
Yes, yeah, you will begin to exceed it in the 30s.
None of us will be here.
So, jumping down to the bottom, just what I was trying to do was spread this out. The very first model showed 2.5% more or less additional tax increases for 5 straight years. So what I've tried to do is spread that out. So this is now spread out over a 7-year period, and the highest year is 1.7%. We got, they said 2 of them at 1.64 and 1.7. I tried to alternate them, doesn't quite work out that way because of a higher year and a lower year. But it ranges from 0.5% to 1.7%.
so FY 31 is now 1.7, it's not 2.36.
Right. Yes, that's the change that you'll see. I pushed that out a year just to try to lower that big number.
The DPW project.
You did that
Yeah,
by
I spread out
moving the DPW out, spreading it out.
when we fully load the debt service. So the other thing I'll just highlight here is when we get to where am I, 30, 34, you see a negative number in terms of additional funds to raise. And that's because we haven't added new bonds, but we have been able to add additional revenue sources. So for example, I'm assuming the second phase of CST has come on board. And so what I'm recommending you do with these negative numbers is basically you apply it towards that catch-all of resiliency projects, whether it be seawall, beefing up seawalls, improving, expanding the size of some culverts, working our way upstream, Sawmill Brook, waterproofing, town hall or, et cetera.
I'm sure we'll have no shortage of new projects.
There won't be any shortage of funding. So it totals about, I forget what I have here, 30 changed on me because when I push things out, it lowers that number a bit. Yeah, 30 million, just under 31 million over that 25-year period. So it is a good chunk of change, no doubt. That assumes, that you keep the taxes at the same higher rate that they were, that you're not lowering them as debt comes off or as other monies become available. You're applying it towards additional projects.
What are you assuming for new growth?
So new growth, I assume that 200,000 a year. And I kept that as part of operating. I didn't apply it towards this.
Okay.
The only new growth I applied here was CST.
Okay. Not the 100 units on Beaverton.
I did not. I did not do that.
Okay.
So, again, lots of assumptions, and things will change, but it does provide at least a framework, I think, for start thinking about all of these different projects. Again, decisions have to be made, which ones actually are going to go forward. This includes the list of the major ones we've been talking about in one shape or form or another. And it presents a path forward, albeit it's certainly hiking taxes. And this isn't showing what might be happening in terms of school budget, in terms of potential overrides there. So that's all in the mix, and that all has to be factored in. But as an exercise of seeing how this might map out, I think it starts to become reachable. Not everything, but I was encouraged by it, I guess is what I want to say, is that it wasn't quite as impossible as I first thought it might
Each time
be.
you did an iteration, it got a little
It
better.
got a little bit.
That's a really good direction.
We keep, oh yeah, the OPEB money we can start drawing down. I had forgotten about that. So we put that in. Where the OPEB is being fully funded in 2.5 years versus 6.5 years. So we're ahead of schedule there. So that's the kind of fine tuning that will continue to happen as you go forward. But I think it does provide a viable, albeit expensive, path forward.
You have Essex Elementary at 27 million, that you're figuring that as the overall cost or our portion?
I'm figuring that's our share.
Our share.
Yeah. And again, that's a guess, right?
Right.
That's
right.
a total.
So Greg, a little question on, so in Bill Keegan's report, he made some mention about, the harbor becoming an enterprise fund somewhere in the future.
Yeah.
Are you sort of thinking about that on this long range, where it would be basically self-sustaining?
Yes,
Okay,
so I'm showing one more dredging, but then I don't show the other dredgings down the line.
That doesn't have to be in an enterprise fund, though.
true, right.
The challenge with the enterprise fund is if it brings in extra revenue,
Can't
we
use it.
can't use it.
Right.
And water is where we tend to bring in extra revenue.
That's right.
You have a lot
I
of
think I've heard that argument before.
So, not looking for a sign off on this right now. It's just a sort of status report of where this modeling is. I hope it's useful to folks as you think about these major projects.
Really good spreadsheet. I think, part of, what I think, FinCom and you, Greg, have been focused on is how do you smooth out the bumps, right? To try and that's all we can do at this point. But as we start to talk about the individual projects, especially the buildings, we've really got to focus on requirements. What are the absolute needs versus the other wish list things that may be in some of these estimates?
Right.
You know, and we haven't had that discussion yet, so I hope we can have those discussions before the plans get too far down, you know, the line.
For sure, for sure. It's a lot easier to lower numbers than it is to raise them.
One of the real advantages though here, and we talked about since exactly a year ago when we met with you, is that a lot of times we sit here in these meetings and meetings and meetings, trying to guess what the voters want or don't want. And, you know, we talk about fire, we talk about police, we talk about DPW and everything else. And a lot of it's guesswork. And I think the advantage of this spreadsheet is that hopefully coordinates between selectmen and finance committee and others, what the long range outline looks like. And we can talk to that as opposed to rolling up on the next year. And Greg or his successor says, well, we've done the engineering for the DPW building. Are we ready to do it now? And everybody looks at each other and goes, well, what else is on the plate?
Right.
And we're all like, well, what else is on the plate when? And this is a very good penciled roadmap. And I would hope that the selectmen could do their best to reach out to the population at large and say, do you like this or do you not like it? Because really, every year we're sitting here trying to figure out what are people gonna
Let me
put their
say-
hand up for.
That you too can reach out.
Oh, yeah. And we do.
We do.
But I think, but that's part of what I agree with that wholeheartedly, but I think some of the, when I talk to residents, what they ask is, okay, we need a new next thing on the list is, you know, DPW building, right? They ask the questions, right? What do you mean by that? You want to build more than what they have. Why? And so then you get into the requirements discussion for, you know, wants versus needs. And I have no answers because when when we look at the facilities master plan, it just doesn't have that level of detail. So,
About the easiest way to explain the DPW is to walk them up there and show them.
no, that's not what I'm getting at. It's a mess, right? So you know you need something new, but what they're proposing includes garage space for vehicles that don't have garage space right now, right?
Right, I
It includes
know, I think
administrative
that
buildings
Right,
that are here now versus now they want to have it there. So that's basically you're asking them to build, asking the residents to approve a bigger facility than what we have.
Nobody's asked anybody to do
No,
anything.
I'm just saying, but it's bigger than what we have. So we have, when we start talking to the residents, we gotta be prepared to.
We can't.
Yeah.
This is, you're ahead of my skis, at
Okay,
least.
understand, but
So,
I was just getting to the point about, the reason I brought it up was because you said we can start talking to residents, and that's where my mind went when I talked to them about this stuff.
Mhm.
These are the questions they ask me, and I have 0 answers.
So when Bill was talking about the communications director and how we did so well in 3A.
Right,
is-
exactly.
And I have said this before.
Yeah.
Isn't that something this person should,
Absolutely.
But
that's a slam dunk, like.
there was, before the task force started communicating, we spent quite a long time figuring out what we wanted to do.
Right.
And with the DPW garage, as Kathy points out, we haven't decided what we want to do.
Exactly, yeah.
That's not gonna be easy. It takes a roadmap.
Yeah.
So better get started now.
well, I think the talks have been, seems to be more than what we need. Right, that's what you're getting at.
Well, we don't know what we're gonna need in 10 years, though.
Right,
Well, no, I mean, we're talking about a different configuration than what we have, okay? Which is administrative space being removed from this facility, DPW not being administratively in this building, being somewhere else. So that's more space in the new DPW facility, plus garage space for vehicles like pickup trucks and things like that. When I walk in downtown, a lot of people who live downtown Manchester don't have garages. So, you got to be prepared to.
But these also,
Look at the
residents downtown
requirements.
don't do their own maintenance on their own. It's-
No, I'm just saying that
There's-
these are the
there's-
types of questions that we're gonna ask
Stop
next.
just a
That's all.
second.
Yeah.
it's getting toward 9:30. We're beginning to talk in circles. Yes, there has to be a design. We have to have the elementary beginning design, decide whether that's what we want, what we need. But that, we're talking stuff that's still a year out. And I don't want to be here at 10:30. So,
Part of that design process will give options.
yes, exactly.
So here's option A, here's option B, here's option C. This is what you get for A, B, and C, and the
And
differences.
at that point, we start talking to people about talking outside with volunteers.
Yes, agreed.
Okay. Unless anyone has something really important and novel to say about long-range planning, I think we are going to move on, whatever it is that's next, the town administrative report.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you very much for your time and effort and explanations.
Put back at you.
What?
Yeah, I don't know what you're looking at.
Can we listen in?
Next.
Well,
We're
it's
not
just a,
saying
it's a
anything,
public,
we're just looking at each other making faces.
Well, I will be brief. So just an update on the senior center. Getting our purchase and sale agreement nailed down with the Masons. That's making good progress in the last few weeks. And the condo docs, we should have that. I'm hopeful, ready for your review into the meeting in 2 weeks. You know, we could, give you comments, we're going to give you last meeting edits. And also underway is the fundraising planning. So we have hired a consulting firm using state money that we received for this effort, outlining some of the game plan, putting a game plan together for the fundraising, identifying potential key donors, and putting together the collateral materials that would be used to approach people for significant contributions to the project. We've also received RFPs from architects to do the design work, produce the bid documents and construction documents. We have two very strong proposals from two different firms, and we'll be vetting those in the next couple of weeks, having that ready. I didn't note this earlier, but I did in my notes to you about funding for that effort. Finance Committee was of a mind that it would be best to use donated funds to pay for that architectural work. We would prefer to hold off on the bonding that would be necessary until after at least the bulk of the funds have been raised. You had talked about doing that in opposite order. The professional consultants, they've said they've seen it either way. They said it can be a small boost to fundraising if you show that you've already got the funding, but it's not significant from what they see in terms of the impact. It's really a local decision preference.
So I, having listened in on that meeting, I am now in agreement with what the Finance Committee recommended. And the reason I'm changing my perspective on that is because one of the comments that they made was, as far as fundraising goes, we showed our interest by buying the darn building. Okay, that ought to be enough to show that the town is serious about having a senior center. That was reason number one. Reason number two is, gosh, I don't want to go into that town meeting without actually having bought the property. We haven't signed anything yet, and it's just taken so long. I'm like, oh my God.
I think that from a numbers, from your point of view, columns, it makes sense. I think we have a social responsibility, okay, to our seniors. And I don't see the downside to doing construction and fundraising concurrently. Okay, and we're going to, but if we do the fundraising, with the bulk of the fundraising, we're gonna delay construction. We're gonna probably end up in the middle of a year. I think that there is an expectation. The seniors have waited well over 10 years for this. And I think we owe it to the seniors. And I don't see a downside to doing the fundraising and the construction at the same time. It's a new, I mean, as Greg pointed out, the library in Gloucester did it. It's a new paradigm as far as fundraising and donating. I know Mass Development offered something like this 20 years ago to a project I was looking at. So I am strongly in favor of, let's get this thing started.
The position of the finance committee was also the fact that when we agreed to recommend the $1 million to purchase the building last year, it was on the basis that the town would not fund any additional portion of that project. And if the town issues a bond, the town is on the hook for it. If
It's
there's
about
not
living up to the
donations.
commitment we already made,
Yeah,
and we've shown enough interest or.
but we reluctantly recommended that $1 million, to be honest.
I would just note that authorizing the bond is not the same as issuing the bond. So-
Trains out of the station. Trains out of the station when you authorize it.
I mean,
But the
you don't,
authorization is
Greg, would it be useful for this fundraising group to say attend our meeting in 2 weeks?
It's gonna be one heck of a meeting in 2 weeks.
I'm not sure what's on the agenda. I know, but they only get more complex the closer we get to the annual meeting, but
yeah, I hear.
you know, it might be useful. I would like to hear from them directly.
Yeah, I have a question. If we're going to do a bond, it has to be voted by a town meeting. And it has to be voted at the election. And we can present this to the town meeting saying, if you authorize this bond, we will start building now and we will fill it with donations.
But you don't know if you will. Yeah, that's.
No, we won't either.
so the earliest you can get that under construction is basically next January. By the time you do the design process and the bidding process, it's going to be next January before you break ground. That's the earliest.
Is there a way to get some design funds so that we can at least show people a picture of what they're?
Fundraising will be a lot easier with something they know what they're donating to.
We have to have that.
John, you speak to the seniors all the time.
Yes.
What's
Yeah,
your-
now they don't know much about fundraising, but they're raising their hands. Several of them certainly want to be involved in all of this. But in any fundraising initiative, you've certainly got to have a draft design of this is what the money is going to. It's a key part of the story, and they're all about putting together a story.
And the design that we currently have is, I think, not sufficient.
I agree, Ann. It's really just a very starting point. We need something that's a little more, has been vetted a bit more.
Greg, you and I exchanged emails about this. What you have right now is essentially what they call a test fit, which is taking the interior and seeing everything fits.
Right.
Right, and you therefore have an architect who did that work, right?
Yes.
So I think you were gonna go back to that architect.
We didn't authorize the money.
Excuse me?
We didn't authorize the money.
I know you didn't. I'm not talking about authorizing the money, let me just
Oh,
finish for a second. And talk to that architect about making whatever the depictions are that you want here and using donated money for that cost.
That'll be the route we take if we don't have any additional monies.
But that's part of the reach out, early reach out to donors. is to-
Yes.
I mean, we're talking about $5,000 or $10,000 max. I mean, that's.
To pretty up what we have, yes. If you want to undertake, if you want to advance the design to a more final form before you make the pretty pictures, then it's going to take more money to.
So how much, Greg? 50,000, you
50.
think? So 50,000. So I think the question to go back to the fundraisers is, how quickly can you get 50K? And if they say it's gonna be, you know, an inordinate amount of time to raise that 50K, okay, then, you know, maybe we revisit the bond, but I don't, if we haven't asked the question, I think maybe what
Yeah.
I'm saying is, can we at least ask the question, how fast can they get their hands on that kind of money to advance the design? Because I agree with the need for something more of a rendering than what
All
we
right, so
totally agree
So
with
the
that.
question is, with the current rendering, can you get 50,000 with the current rendering so we can get 3 million with a much better rendering?
I don't think we're going to settle this one tonight.
No,
Let me do some more homework and I can tee up some information for you.
They
So-
never come up with a timeline as to fully funding with fundraising.
My goal would be to,
I mean, I know they can't give you a definite, but is there
I
like
mean,
a,
typically, it'd be 12 to 18 months. Is what they would say, that they're encouraged by the community here, they think that might be shorter here, but, you know, you never know for sure. But they're pretty optimistic.
from a
From what they
perspective, yeah, I'm sorry, from my perspective is we could retire the debt when at ribbon cutting.
but you can't, and I'm all for doing that, but you can't guarantee that.
Okay, so it takes an extra year.
no.
But you need to let people know that when they vote on it, they gotta know that that's,
Well, again, it will be presented that way.
Which is different than how it was presented
presented
last
last
year, which
year.
is
But
FinCom's
things
point.
change, okay? And we'll come back and say, hey, guys, we have a different perspective now than we did a year ago.
And so then,
All
2
right.
years from now, when you don't get the donations, things change.
I think we still have a
The
responsibility.
sense is it's gonna cost a lot more than 2.5 million.
Whose sense is that?
Andy, who's in the construction business.
Okay, so we're asking for 3.
I mean, the two architects we interviewed with their professional estimators.
Yeah.
They were certainly, they weren't comfortable with 2 million, they were very comfortable with 3, and they think we could do it for 2.5.
No, and I'm not arguing the cost. I'm just saying is that I just feel that and I keep on coming back, and I'm beating a dead horse, obviously, and I'm the only one that's in this feeling is that, yes, we can look at columns and numbers, and we can look at lifestyle. All right, and we sit here and we're talking about the schools and our kids, but we keep forgetting about the seniors.
I
don't
agree,
think-
I agree with that.
I don't think,
Yeah.
I'm certainly not saying that. I'm just, not at all. It's just that we have a very big list of very expensive things.
And
And
if
the
people
senior center
want
is
to
very
open
important
their
to me,
checkbooks.
but
But the people that are, who need it the most might not have those, those checkbook, the pockets for that.
Disagree with that.
Okay, well,
Okay, we're not gonna
we can
solve
agree,
this either.
we can agree to disagree, because you're disagreeing with me on my point, I'm gonna disagree with you on yours.
5% of residents in town will see.
But there are seniors and seniors, and the people who go to
Yeah.
the senior center are tend to be less affluent than the people who spend their winters in Hawaii.
Yeah, exactly. They're the ones that can't afford to, yeah, they're only looking forward to going to the senior center for the winter.
So, but let's continue the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah,
We're trying to get some more
When,
information.
when do we have to have a decision? Because it has to go into the warrant and if we are going,
Right, so you have to finalize that warrant on your April date, second?
The second one?
No.
No, it would be the first one, would be
Yeah.
the seventh.
Seventh.
Doesn't the warrant go into the FinCom report? I thought it did.
Yes,
Yes.
so we may have to do a special meeting April 1st. April.
No, so it's only the first now.
That's good.
We'll need we'll need that warrant finalized by first Monday in April.
I'm sorry, when do we meet? So April 1st is a Tuesday.
So we may need a special meeting on the 31st.
31st of March.
You finalize your report on the 27th or so.
It sounds like 31st now.
we want you to work hard. We think it's good for you.
We think better with sleep.
Good, thank you.
We'll get right on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll finish up here. That wasn't short. 3A is an unfunded mandate. As I think most of you know, the state auditor came out with a written opinion concluding that the zoning law is an unfunded mandate. That was her opinion. The AG's office has already come out and says she strongly disagrees with that opinion. She'll defend it in court. Regardless, the auditor, the state auditor, concluded in her own opinion and explained that the way that a town could follow up on her opinion would be to seek a waiver from a judge, take it to court, seek a waiver from the mandate because claiming it's an unfunded mandate. So we would not have a very strong leg to stand on if we were to do that. Because we received funding from the state to develop the proposal, and we did an impact analysis that indicated that the development that would result would not have a negative impact on our fiscal standing. So
So A, it was funded, and second, it's not, there's nothing to fund.
it's not causing an additional cost. So that's the process that any town would have to pursue.
But it's town by town.
But it's town by town.
So this issue isn't going away. Okay, but it seems like every other week there's a new, town, a decision that's come forth because some town decided to sue on this aspect. The whole 3A conversation hasn't gone away because we have moved our plan. And so what I was wondering is there a way for us to, kind of just, I know you're keeping abreast of it, but I'm not sure how quickly we can communicate to the town, hey, you know what? We know this happened, but here's how it does or does not affect us, because there's just a lot of churn going on in terms of conversations and social media and
For the
rather
task force,
than,
that retirement.
there's a communication aspect that there's an operational aspect to this, it's not going away anytime soon. And I just feel like if we don't communicate on,
But
I don't know, I'm
so-
just asking.
Yeah,
And it shouldn't be on you to necessarily do that,
but just a little bit of caution that we don't
Yeah.
respond to every
Yes.
Right, no, understand.
raised hand.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Because we don't, who knows what's gonna happen tomorrow?
I'm just saying, there's a lot of, so residents have been emailing us, asking us, are we doing anything about this? So the information on those that information isn't getting out to everybody, right? You know, the response doesn't get out to
Yeah.
everybody, so I'm just wondering, is there anything we want, maybe we don't want to do anything about that, but I'm just,
Yeah, we can try to do more
I don't
time.
know if it's you know, a part of your weekly thing in the cricket, or, I don't know. It's just,
If you have
Fine.
bandwidth to just go over the,
Yeah, so yes, like Tiffany and I talk pretty regularly on what's the chatter out there. I don't follow, but she does, and so.
you don't want to. Yes.
So we can try to, and if you're feeling a need for something, let me know, and we can.
Yeah. I think that would be a good topic to take up. Because there is a lot of chatter and everybody assumes that somewhere there's a wormhole and we can get into another universe and not have this happen, but.
And I just don't think it's gonna end anytime soon. That's the only reason I bring it up, because I just don't think it's gonna end anytime soon,
No, it's a
unfortunately.
never ending story. What's that?
I'm gonna die with this thing.
Okay,
Screening update, you can read what I wrote, if they're underway, they have interviews this week, and we are targeting that April 3rd timeframe, 4 o'clock. To start the interviews. We'll have 2 or 3, depending what the recommendation is. So if you can plan on that, that's helpful. And
Was that the third, right?
April. It was a Thursday, right?
Thursday the
Yeah.
3rd, yes, and then assuming you're gonna want to sort of sleep on it, make a decision maybe on the 7th.
Yeah.
And then just totally unrelated to anything else, as a part of the cybersecurity, it's highly recommended that we transition our domain name to a .gov rather than our manchester.ma.us. So we were going to use manchesterma.gov.
oh, man.
Yeah.
Our
That is
email
such a
address
mess.
is all changed.
That is so hard. It's,
I'll give them 2 months to let people know, right?
Well,
They'll be
both will be
redirected, yeah.
functional. One will
Yeah, but they'll
automatically
go- Yeah, don't worry about
kick you
it.
to the other one, yes.
It'll be
There'll be a
fine.
transition period when.
better be about a 6-year transition.
Right. Yes.
Well, we know who needs it. Rain needs it.
Yeah, this,
But
that
that
stuff
is tough.
happens.
It's on its way. What do you anticipate?
A couple, 3 months.
Yeah, I would say so, 4 months.
Okay. Lots of other towns use orgs and comms and,
They do. They do.
and that's,
It's. They're advising us the best practices to use the .gov,
It helps identify
legitimate,
legitimate stuff.
Right.
If you, naming conventions. can
that's
be
part of it.
That's the biggest decision we have to make.
that's the one that's gonna. My experience has been that when you change the name of your company and you change your email addresses, everything goes to hell for about a year.
Oh, what is Greg here? He's not gonna be right for it.
There you go.
I didn't have a job.
Notice he's making the change right, what happens right after he's gone.
Yeah, gee.
Thanks.
Do I hear a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Yes,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Kathy.
Yes.
Anne says yes, and Brian.
Yes.
Sign this license.
Oh.
I won't give it out until I hear about the zoning. Huh?
A pen died. That's what I was all scribbling about.
Oh.
Ah, so you're the one with that. You get all of that.
I would have practiced my signature a while ago.
Oh, God. I don't know why you have to practice.
Because I don't sign anything anymore.